Okay. Okay, so I'd like to call to order the August 8th Auburn Maine Planning Board meeting, and I will start with roll call to my left.
Tim DeRoche. Darren Finnegan.
Dave Trask. Paul Jacques.
Stacy LeBlanc.
Evan Sear.
Amanda Garrett. Tony Ferraro.
Riley Bergeron.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda are our meeting minutes, and we just received them. So at this point in time, I guess I would seek a motion that we potentially pause and not accept the meeting minutes because we've not had a chance to review them. Do you have a second?
So moved.
Okay, all those in favor? Excellent. Alrighty, so the third item on the agenda is a zoning text amendment, and just kind of like foundationally for this meeting in general, and as we go to each one of these items, we did review this petition text amendment last month, right? So for all intents and purposes, like we reviewed it, we heard the staff report, we heard from the applicant, we heard from public comment, we digested it, right? We shouldn't have like, a ton more questions around this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it to staff, and I'm going to ask them to just kind of highlight the pertinent points that potentially have changed with this. And then if there really isn't anything, I think then we move forward.
Thank you. Nothing has really changed since the last meeting, other than we and as staff and the city attorney had a couple of concerns with the language as it was proposed. The way that it's proposed, it says the front setback shall be measured from the private access drive, accessway or parking area. We think that that would be better if it may be measured, so that if you do have frontage on a public street, you can also build along that frontage. For that reason as well, as some other changes that we've run into in T42B that we think would help encourage smaller lot, single-family home development, and add some clarity. We're recommending that you not approve, recommend that the council not approve the petition language, and that the next item on your agenda, we can get into the details of the other changes that we're suggesting that you consider.
Absolutely. So does that make sense for everybody? Okay. All right, any questions for staff before we move to public comment?
Do I recall last time there was also a pause requested so that legal could review it as well? Was there any feedback from them regarding that?
Yeah, there certainly was. Big part of the reason for asking for that to be tabled is because legal had not had a chance to provide alternate language to achieve much of the same outcome. But also to make some other changes that had already been identified in the same chapter. So the next item on your agenda really gets into those details. We had a lot of a discussion during the adoption of the T42B zone as well as project approvals related to this, and specific language was added to allow that setback to be measured from more than just public ways, but also accessways, parking lots. And we just think the language in the second item on your agenda tonight achieves that, clarifies that, the intent of what we already had, but it also fixes a few other things that we think would be helpful.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I will open it up for public comment. I'd seek a motion.
So move.
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Excellent. So at this point in time, we're opening it up to public comment. Come forward to the podium. You have 5 minutes. State your name and your address.
Good evening. My name is Jeffrey Harmon. I live at 34 Vista Drive. I would just renew the comments I made at the last meeting based on written legal opinion by Freddie Flaherty regarding this petition, and for the sake of time, I'll just summarize quickly the 2 points. The first point is that under Maine law, there's a principle called consistency in which statutes and ordinances have to be internally consistent. It can't say in the ordinance in one place you can't do X, and another place in the same ordinance you can do X. So there's a significant issue here if you clarify this, in that the clarifying language regarding the setback will be directly contradictory to not only the codified purpose of form-based codes as shown in Chapter 60, but also the specific purpose for the 4.2b zone form-based code shown at 6548B. So making this change, such a change as this, is just going to cause more confusion and just have more appeals and have uncertainty in the process. The second point I would make is that there's a retroactivity provision in this ordinance which is directly prohibited in Maine law under Title 30A MRSA 3007 subsection 6, and the planning board and then the city council in Auburn does not have the authority to enact ordinances in direct violation of state law. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to remind the public that at this point in time, the public hearing is around the petition for the text amendment, which staff has suggested that we not adopt. So I just want to make sure that we're just addressing the petition language before we move on to the next agenda item.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Stephen Beal, 575 Johnson Road. Although it is directed to this text and the staff has recommended against it, I'd like to reiterate the point that Mr. Harmon just made, that this retroactivity provision, which is expressly contained in this text proposal, is prohibited not only by the section of Title 30A that Mr. Harmon mentioned, but also by 1 MRSA Section 302, which is referred to in the staff report, although the staff omitted the reference to Title I, which prohibits any retroactive enactments, ex post facto laws in effect. And the Auburn City Charter contains an express provision in Section 1.1, the very first section of the charter, that the Auburn government is authorized to enact its own ordinances, provided that they do not violate state law. That provision would expressly violate state law and should be rejected. The other issue that both this topic and the next one present is that the very issue that's at stake here, this measurement feature as to whether or not it can be done from a private way or must be done from a public way, is the very subject of the present appeal of the Stable Ridge 2 authorization presently pending in Androscoggin County Superior Court. That has been fully briefed. All the briefs are in, and it awaits the judge's decision. And it makes no sense to make an enactment to change an ordinance now when the city may find that it is correct in its legal reasoning within a matter of whatever number of weeks it may be. And on the other hand, the city may find that its decision was incorrect in the judgment of the Superior Court, in which case it's just going to cost the city additional money if it adopts provisions relative to that provision, that private versus public way provision, at this point in time when all it has to do is sit and wait a determination of the Superior Court. So the city should reject this proposal for all of those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members would like to come forward to speak? Okay, seeing none, I will seek a motion to close public comment.
So moved.
All right, do you have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Excellent. So at this point in time, so we had two people. I don't know if I heard any questions per se, but if anyone has any comments, if you have any more additional questions for staff, we can address that and or move to a motion.
What was the legal's opinion with regard to whether or not this is a retroactive action?
So our council also has concerns with the retroactivity. Staff as well. The way that the language was drafted in the petition, it mentions retroactivity pretty explicitly in the description, but the ordinance text itself that was proposed for adoption makes no mention of retroactivity. It's described as being intended to apply retroactively, but the ordinance itself doesn't contain that language. So that is one of the concerns and one of the reasons why we recommended not approving this, but approving something else as the next item.
And I know the next set of zoning language is very similar. So I guess it leads me to the question, why would this be considered retroactive if no other zoning change is considered retroactive? I think about, for instance, form-based code. My house went from being non-conforming to conforming. That was not a retroactive action. It was just a consequence of the change, one. And two, making these changes, did legal feel that it had any bearing on the case in Superior Court? I guess I feel like it has zero bearing on that case, and that case has zero bearing on this, because if we are making a change to the ordinance, that case is predicated on the notion that something was inappropriately approved at the time. That predication doesn't change regardless of what we do now, correct?
That's been our experience with appeals as staff, is that the judge is reviewing the materials that and the ordinances that were available to the board on that day. That's part of why we are not recommending that the board approve this change and that we do something a little bit different based on legal advice. But I agree with that we didn't think that it would affect a prior approval. And the fact that the ordinance itself makes no mention of retroactivity, it's just the description of what they wanted to happen with that ordinance text, is just another reason why we didn't think it would apply retroactivity, nor could it.
Did legal approve the new verbiage?
Yes, we worked closely with Sally Daggett, the city attorney, on the next item on your agenda with that proposed language.
Okay, any other questions? If not, I would seek a motion.
I make a motion to recommend that the City Council not amend the table of principal building placement of Section 60-548B, front setback principle, where private shared access drive is provided, serving more than one structure, minimizing access points on any public road. The front setback shall be measured from the private access drive, pedestrian access way or parking area for traditional downtown neighborhood T-4.2B as shown in the citizens petition submitted June 12, 2023.
All right, do you have a second?
Second.
Are there any questions about this motion, deliberation, debate? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor? All those opposed? It's unanimous. All right, perfect. Alrighty, going on to item number 4. So this is, obviously parlaying off of the petition. So it is a form-based code text amendment. And I will hand it over to staff for review.
Thank you. Again, this change includes some language that's very similar to the previous language. During the adoption process of the T42B, we had a lot of discussions about allowing for setbacks to be measured from a private access way or shared access way. The primary reason for that is on larger in-town lots, the city does not want to create a lot of new public maintenance responsibilities for new roads. So as a way to allow for new developments to be fronted on a new private road, that was a flexibility that we wanted to add to the T42B district. We talked about that in some of the prior approvals pretty specifically. We believe that the table, as it's shown, for 60-548B1 building placement and configuration, and the note added with public right-of-way that allows for accessway and parking lots to be also the point where you measure that front setback. We believe that the ordinance allows for that. There is an appeal, as a couple members of the public mentioned. So I think it makes sense to add clarity to the ordinance so we don't continue to have those appeals, even though we believe that that was a very intentional effort to allow for to encourage shared access ways and to allow those measurements to happen not only from the public street, but also from the shared access ways, parking lots. The proposed language in this change is slightly different than the petition in that it says the front setback may be measured from the private access drive, pedestrian access way, or parking area, where the petition said shall. We certainly don't want to prevent people from building out their existing public street frontage when they have a private shared access way, but I think it's important if we want to see infill development to allow for buildings to be placed on the street and a private shared access way. So this would give the board very clear direction that that is allowed under the zoning ordinance. We also, the intent and purpose of T42B, the word setbacks was 2 words. It's now 1 word, just a spelling, grammatical correction. On 60-548B1, the building placement and configuration, it says public, instead of public right-of-way, access way, and parking lots, it says public right-of-way, or where shared access is provided, the front setback may be measured from the private access drive, pedestrian access way, or parking areas. So I think sort of bulletproof clarity for everybody moving forward that can be how it's measured. We also looked at the table in the same section, the next page of your draft ordinance, principal building placement on lot. What we've seen with a couple of infill developments that we've talked to people about is they don't want to split their lot to make a smaller lot. And they don't want to build a house that covers 60% of the frontage. So if somebody had a 200-foot wide lot in the T42B, the ordinance calls for 60% of their street frontage to be built out. That's a long width along the road for a single-family home, so some flexibility there for single and two-family homes, we think, could help people that want to still have a large lot in town and don't want to be forced to build out more frontage in order to develop that lot. Below that table is where the note that the front setback may be measured from the private access drive. As you continue to move through the ordinance, now on page 5 of 5 of the actual ordinance text, it adds additional flexibility to the ground story frontage facade with single and two-family homes not being required to have the same window and door placement as commercial or multifamily buildings that the form-based code calls for. And then the upper story facade, the same thing, more flexibility for the 1 or 2 family units and not requiring the same window and door fenestration that is required for commercial and multifamily structures. So those are quite often owners building a home or people trying to come up with the plans themselves. And what we found is it's more difficult to work with an individual who's not used to doing a 1 or 2 family home to really demonstrate that they comply with that. And it's easier to get that level of plan details for someone who hired a professional to come to you for a subdivision or multifamily or commercial project because they have that expertise on their team. And that is it for the summary of changes for the staff recommended version of the T42B text amendment.
Okay, perfect. Any questions for staff before we move into public comment? Okay, seeing none, I'll seek a motion to open up public comment. Do
So moved.
you have a second?
Second.
Excellent. All those in favor? Perfect. Okay, so opening up public comment, just come to the podium, 5 minutes, state your name and your address.
Hello, my name is Ryan Smith. I live at 14 Weaver Street. I do have some issues with these changes. If you look at our GIS, 48 Gamage Avenue actually has a shared access way. I looked through thank you for bringing that up. I looked maybe 30 seconds through the map to find something to make my point just now. If you scroll out a little bit, you'll notice that the shared access drive going to 48 is coming off of, I think, Oakland Street. That house would then be non-conforming if you made this change. The reason why is you're now measuring the setbacks from the parking areas in the driveway, and that they would have to rip out 5 feet of the asphalt nearest to their home so that they're at least 5 feet away from their parking area. And they're not within 25 feet of either side. They're about 38 feet from Gamage Avenue, and more from the other streets. So this idea right here doesn't make any sense, because when we were going through all the T 4.2 and then 4.2B, I was at every single one of those planning board meetings, and it was all championed that we're going to bring these houses closer to the road and it's going to slow down traffic. But now we're saying, not really, because some apartment complex can't keep building. It doesn't make sense to me. So that's just one example of why I don't think these changes make sense. If you could also go to 530 Court Street, please. This is actually right across the street from a stable ridge. And by making this change to allow a developer to make more money, you are now taking the common citizen and making their life a lot harder. This is my in-laws' house, and I sat here when they were trying to pass 4.2B, which you did, and John Blaze was actually sitting here, and I said, this house is my in-laws, it would now be non-conforming under this new ordinance. And we were told, no, you can just count the driveway. Well, that doesn't make sense, because if you have to be 5 feet away from your driveway or parking area, then this house is non-conforming because the asphalt goes right up to the garage. So therefore, every new house with the shared access way can't put their driveway up to their garage because they have to have a 5-foot buffer from their parking area. You see how that makes no sense? The whole intent was a public way from the beginning. But then I was told at that meeting, once public comment closed, John Blaze said that, no, we'll just count the driveway and that will be a conforming house. I couldn't come back up and say, actually, no, you're wrong. But this morning I was on the phone with Catherine, actually, and she said, actually, Ryan, you're right. This change would make that non-conforming, and T 4.2B did. So again, if my in-laws' house burns down, their whole family owned all this land, that entire side of the hill, Merrill Hill. They gifted the land for the Auburn Middle School. That is their last parcel of family land that they own up there. And they want to be able to rebuild because some developer wants to change to an ordinance so they can make more money. It doesn't make sense to me. I think we should actually reword these and instead saying that you can measure from a setback, you should just say stable ridge apartments can do whatever they want. I think that would be a lot more clarifying and transparent to the public. But I don't think these changes make sense at all. I don't think T 4.2B or T 4.2 made sense at all for this exact reason, but I was told that I was wrong, and I was told that everything I was saying was not true, and here we are now adjusting even more parts. We're adjusting the facade part of it. Well, the public said during that making, we want more say, and we could have sorted this stuff out had we taken our time the first time and done this a proper way, but we didn't. And now here we are a year later, thousands of dollars in legal fees to help defend a developer so they can make more money, and thousands of dollars in staff time, poor staff, being overworked. And we could have avoided all this had we just done this properly the first time and engaged the public properly. So I would ask that, again, we take our time and make these changes properly, because next up on the next agenda, we are now going to decide to implement this again without actually fully knowing what we're implementing. So those are my frustrations, and I hope you guys can take my comments seriously and realize that I want what's best for the average Auburn citizen. And I said from the beginning, this is not, and I'm still saying it now, this needs a lot more work and a lot more time, and form-based code does not work for single-family neighborhoods. Thank you.
My name's Jeffrey Harmon. I live at 34 Vista Drive. I'm quite surprised that the staff decided to bring this item forward at this time. The city has just spent thousands of dollars and many, many hours making an argument in Superior Court that the planning board did not err in their prior actions and that they interpreted the front setback requirements correctly. Here we have a tacit admission by the city that in fact their filing in Superior Court isn't correct, and they did make a mistake, and now they need to go back and fix it. The problem with going back and fixing this is the same as I mentioned with the last agenda item. You are opening yourself up to many, many 80B appeals. Anytime anyone would measure from the driveway, from the parking area, that is contrary to the codified purpose found at chapter 60, 548B. I would urge you all to review that, and you will see that putting buildings hundreds or thousands of feet from the public way is in direct conflict with the current ordinance. Now, it would seem to me if what you want to do is what Mr. Cousins has described, have the ability to have apartment buildings, houses, whatever, many feet from a public way, off of a shared driveway, that is not appropriate in a form-based code. And you need to develop a zoning code in which such a standard would be appropriate. But to do this in this current 4.2B ordinance is going to open up an 80B appeal every time that you approve a project that's not off the public way because it's inconsistent with the purpose of the ordinance. Thank you.
Stephen Beal, 575 Johnson Road. I want to bring up a couple of new points. Under the present approval of Stable Ridge 2, that was approved as a project for 5 buildings. Building permits have been issued for certain of those buildings, but not for others. Again, the issue as to whether it's the public or private way definition is before the Superior Court, and it will make a complicated matter even much more complicated if you have building permits that are going to be determined by whether they were issued at the time for certain buildings but not others, because certain buildings may be approved and not others. It's better to wait and get the answer from the Superior Court before considering this proposed action here tonight. The other question I have is a more general one, which is as to how this matter got before the planning board in the first place. There are 3 methods by which a matter can be brought before the planning board. One is, of course, by a petition. That's not this ordinance, it was the previous proposal. It can be done by direction of the city council. I haven't seen any record that the city council directed the planning board to consider this alternate change. And secondly, it can be done by the planning board's own initiative. Having been to all the council and planning board meetings for more months than I care to remember, I don't recall the planning board initiating a directive to staff to do this on the planning board's initiative. So that question serves to establish the fact that this matter is not even at all properly before this board. Thank you.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Jessica Klemick. I live on Briarcliff Knoll in Auburn. I'm here this evening not only as the petition applicant for the agenda item prior. I'm also the developer behind Stable Ridge Apartments. But I'm a 42-year resident of Auburn. And this petition language that we previously discussed, and now we've kind of parlayed into this agenda item, while it's not directly related to Stable Ridge Apartments, though many feel it is, it does impact because, of course, Stable Ridge was approved under the T4.2B ordinance, Phase 2. So I am not a corporate developer. I'm not an out-of-state developer. I'm a local developer. And we've chosen to invest within the city that we live, that we work, that we play, that we raise our children in. And I want it to be known, and just a reminder, that prior to coming before the planning board for our Phase 1 approvals in April of 2022. And as any good developer would know, you partner with the city. So there are several meetings with city staff where you're talking about your development and your layout plan, and you're ensuring that you're meeting all of the zoning requirements. And we did just that before we came in front of planning board for approvals of phase 1. And we received those approvals. And we did the same approach with phase 2, where we had meetings to discuss layout plans before we came in front of planning board for approval, and we received approvals for phase 2. I think that this petition language, it's mentioned by those who have come up prior, or this agenda item to adjust and add clarity to language specific to setbacks. You hear that they're mentioning this appeal, that they're mentioning Stable Ridge Apartments, and they're hyper-focused on Stable Ridge Apartments. But this language truly is clarity. Or staff, when we met to discuss our lot layout plan and setbacks for Stable Ridge Apartments Phase 1, which according to those who have come up prior to, or the plaintiff in the open appeal, Phase 1 doesn't even meet the setbacks according to them, let alone Phase 2. City staff has been clear that it does. The intention behind the setbacks is that they can be calculated from access point or parking lot. And in regards to the pending appeal, it's unfortunate that despite the clear response during our planning board public hearing in March of this year, the plaintiff continued to pursue action against this board and against the City of Auburn, despite the known financial impacts and burden it imposes on the residents of Auburn. We're all aware that only a direct abutter can appeal in a manner in which the plaintiff did. It's clear that there is one objective here, and that is not to hold staff or this planning board accountable to adhering to the law when approving development, but more so the very definition of a not in my backyard attack on your authority and on city staff's authority. And this is why I feel that the board should not sit here and listen to the legal jargon that's been spewed by those who have come up prior to myself to confuse you and to make you think that you can't sit here and agree with staff and make a vote on clarifying language that only betters and adds clarity to an ordinance that you've supported. Thank you.
Okay, any other members of the public like to come forward? Okay, seeing none, I'll seek a motion to close public comment.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor? Excellent, great. So at this point in time, I heard a question. I know that others did as well, and so I think we have conversation with staff about some questions that happened and or get any clarification as well.
I guess I'll start. I guess I have a question for staff with regard to, have there been any, besides the lawsuit, have there been other issues or other contentious problems with the existing language that have caused this to be brought forward? We mentioned clarifying, but that usually implies that there's been lots of, to me, issues that require clarification and betterment. So just curious as to, besides the lawsuit.
Yeah, we talk to a lot of people about things that they're considering or projects that they're proposing. Some of them make it to a permit stage, some of them don't. A lot of people thinking about adding a unit, an accessory unit, or building in addition to their house have expressed that it's difficult for them to understand those window and door fenestrations on their project that they're trying to design as a homeowner. The projects that, some of the projects that we've seen very detailed plans on have fallen within that range. It seems most single-family home designs that are fairly consistent with what we see in those neighborhoods have pretty close to what the ordinance requires, and we were just trying to simplify that review process. and didn't feel that that change would really change the entire character of a neighborhood. These are mostly smaller infill lots. But there are people that discuss projects on a regular basis that have found those standards frustrating. And somebody who has a 100-foot wide lot may not want to build their house 60 feet wide on that lot, or be faced with splitting the lot in half and owning 2 lots, so they can build a narrower frontage and own 2 50 by 50-foot wide lots. So there's a way around it for people anyways. We just thought it was adding flexibility for 1 and 2 family homes.
Did legal look at the approvals before they were presented to the planning board for phase 1 and especially phase 2 for the development?
We don't have the city attorney review every project. We did, in going through these ordinance changes, consult with the city attorney, same attorneys that are working on the appeal. We think it's clear in the discussion, the adoption of the text, that we talked about this and why it was important to have some flexibility on these larger lots where they have a shared access drive. The comp plan has a goal of encouraging those shared access drives, and I think Stable Ridge was brought up. This is a narrow lot that's very deep, and to interpret the ordinance to say that all of the buildings have to be on the street would mean that we would just not allow for infill on any larger lots in town, because that don't have a shallow depth with a very wide frontage. Encouraging a shared access way got units that are needed built without the city having multiple driveways and without the city having new maintenance responsibilities for the road. And that's a clear goal of the comp plan that we tried to achieve with the language that was already adopted. We think it does, but obviously there's room for clarity to be added, so we don't continue to have appeals about it if that's the intent.
What about Mr. Beal's concern about how this agenda item came before us? It's not one of the 3 traditional.
Yeah, so there are, as he said, 3 ways for an agenda item to come before the board. The board made, at staff's request at the last meeting, we asked for time to have the city attorney review it and propose text that was vetted by the city attorney. The board made a 2-part motion. One was to table it. The second part was to direct planning staff to identify additional changes within the form-based code that are appropriate and needed, and that those changes be presented at the August 8th, 2023 meeting, or a meeting at which staff feels they are prepared to present. The motion was made by Sear, second by Riley, and it was a 7-0 vote. So we took that as a directive from the board.
What would happen with the homes that don't, if the zone changes, what would happen with the homes that don't fit into that standard?
A home that doesn't fit into the standard would be allowed to continue to exist forever, much like the non-conforming homes that we have throughout the T42 neighborhoods. We had with the urban residential zone. We still have some with T42B as well as T42. If in an example like this, 530 Court Street that was brought up, the only projects that staff is allowed to approve without coming to the planning board are projects that meet all of the dimensional standards. If somebody proposes a project that doesn't meet one of those dimensional standards, the ordinance specifically says that the planning board is the board that could approve that. If this house burned down and the person came in and said, I'm trying to reuse my foundation and I really want to build in the same location, we would suggest that they go to you to ask for that waiver, and that would be a pretty compelling story. There are a lot of buildings in the T42B zone that were non-conforming before. There are still some that are non-conforming, but I think the in-town historic neighborhoods where they were built closer to the street, there are a lot more that were made conforming than made non-conforming.
And at that time, the applicant could just show, these were my current plans, where my house was, it burnt down, I want to build in the same place that my home was previously built.
They could propose that to the planning board, yep. If it didn't meet the setbacks, then staff would not be able to, but we could send them to the planning board.
So that would be a complete loss, right? Because I believe in the case of a fire, you only need something like, what is it, like 30%? It's very low.
More than 65% lost, yeah.
So
about
more than
35% remaining.
So 35% remaining, and they would still be allowed to rebuild.
Yes.
As
Yep.
is.
At a staff level, just a building permit.
Right. Would they also be allowed to build at a staff level if it was a complete 100% loss? And I assume with a complete 100% loss, I mean, at that point, you've got a foundation that's been affected. You can't just build right on that foundation again. You're going to have to re-pour. Would they simply be able to move the house 5 feet away and have a walkway from the driveway to the house? And
They could do that as well, and we could look at, I don't know if that's the garage on the front, but porches, stoops can extend into that 5-foot setback. So depending on what part of the house is next to that, we could make that work.
while we're talking about specific properties, the property that on Gamage Ave that we were told would now become non-conforming, I'm having a hard time understanding why that statement was made. The language being proposed by staff says may, so it does not say shall. So the setback is not required to be measured from that person's driveway, correct?
It's not. It would allow for it to be, but it doesn't require it. And my sense in looking at that is that it's already non-conforming, and that it might be easier to make it conforming with that flexibility.
Well, I was just going to make the point that on that particular property, it is currently non-conforming. If they wanted their property to be a conforming property, they could create 5 feet of space between their driveway and the house, either by removing a portion of the drive or whatever, and then they would become conforming. So in that sense, T42B is actually allowing this property to the opportunity to become conforming without having to move the house, which is impossible to do in most cases.
And you could also look at it as the shared access way ended at the property line. I think there's flexibility in how you site that house in that situation.
I have a question about setbacks in throughout the rest of the ordinance. So throughout the rest of the ordinance, we allowed for PUDs, planned unit developments. People often think of those as subdivisions. Those are often on private roads, but not always. How is the setback determined for those if they're on a private road?
Under the PUD ordinance, we actually don't have to require the same setbacks that are required in the zoning district. Internal to the development, we have to around the perimeter, but along the shared access road, the board could approve a smaller or larger setback in a planned unit development along a shared access road. And that flexibility is, again, part of trying to encourage density on a parcel without taking on new maintenance costs and responsibilities on the city side.
So why is there a difference for the requirements for with regard to a PUD that is reviewed under subdivision versus a subdivision which is reviewed under special exception and site plan review, given that the state allows for subdivision to be reviewed under site plan review and special exception?
I guess I would say that not all subdivisions or site plan reviews are PUDs, but a developer could choose to take on those extra obligations under the PUD ordinance to get those other flexibilities. This one I don't believe was reviewed as a planned unit development, although they could have proposed that, but they really didn't have to. I think our site plan review ordinance allowed for it by substituting that for the subdivision approval. Usually developers are looking for some variation from the traditional zoning district standard to use the PUD ordinance, because there are some extra obligations that go with that. If you have 20 acres and you have a 1 acre lot size minimum, you could make quarter acre lots in a PUD and then have open space that averages out to be the 1 acre lot size minimum, but the road is, far shorter, the construction costs are smaller, they avoid the wetlands, but the average density for the whole parcel meets the standard. I think the PUDs allow you to look at the whole parcel and then approve something that's very different than what the zoning ordinance requires in that district, to concentrate units on a smaller piece of the parcel.
All right, so I have a question. So when I look at the staff packet, it says staff recommendation, text amendment to add clarity, right? So clarity means you have an item and you're clarifying the item. So my question is, if we don't add clarity, does that mean some of these developments that are in queue would not be able to be built? But if this clarity is added, then some of the work that's in progress could be built. I just want to make sure I want to make sure I'm understanding.
Yeah, I know the appeal was mentioned.
No. I'm asking a question about the word clarity in my staff packet of, do we have an item and we're just clarifying it, but for purposes of future development, helping people to develop, right? It adds clarity, a little bit more granular to understand it. Or are we adding clarity to allow for a development which was previously approved but now can't because the clarity is not there?
So we don't think this affects previously approved developments.
So then why do we have a petition then? Why did we get the citizens petition?
We have the citizens petition that asked for retroactivity. This proposal does not include retroactivity. So this would be for projects moving forward from when and if the council chooses to adopt this language. It would be from that day forward. It would not change a past approval.
Still think my head's not wrapping around it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
do you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like if the language is there and it allows for previous conversations and future conversations, then that's how I see the word clarity versus I'm adding clarity and it's not going to allow for prior, but it's going to allow for future. That's a real change. You know what I mean? So versus clarity means to me, I'm adding additional granularity to something that is already present, and it just adds additional information to it. But it doesn't necessarily change. Does that make sense? It just makes it a longer definition.
Yeah, there's clarity on the setbacks being measured from shared access ways, parking lots.
Clarity or change?
Clarity. Okay. And then some changes that we had talked about for additional flexibility for 1 and 2 family homes. But we don't believe that we could have done it retroactively, which is a big part of why we didn't recommend that petition, and we are not intending to apply this retroactively because we don't think we're allowed to. And it would apply to future projects, but it would hopefully prevent, I think one of the public commenters said that we're going to have appeals of every planning board decision under this zoning ordinance. We want to avoid that. We think this clarity makes it less likely to have continued appeals of approvals that use a shared access way.
So this is going forward and not having previous projects grandfathered in?
So any project that was previously approved is still approved the way that it was approved previously.
Yeah, I think the reason that we don't need retroactivity, well, one, we can't do that. There's that piece. But the idea is that this is how staff has interpreted the ordinance. And this is all, I was on the planning board before we had form-based code, and it was how staff interpreted the ordinance even prior to form-based code. So to me, this clarity is not about being retroactive. My opinion is that we don't need a retroactive action. I think that the city, my personal opinion is that the city will prevail, but more to the point, this has nothing to do with the litigation that's happening. What it's doing is acknowledging that this was apparently not clear enough to the point that someone chose to create a legal complaint. And I think what Eric is saying is that that's exactly what we want to avoid. Moving forward, we don't want to have people continue to say, but wait a second, that's not clear. So I understand the idea that there are some people that think maybe it would be nice if it applied to Stable Ridge. My opinion is it doesn't matter whether it applies to Stable Ridge or not. That was the way staff interpreted setbacks then. And staff is asking for us at this point to clarify that so that they don't have to continue, the city doesn't have to continue to deal with people who have a disagreement about the clarity of the ordinance. Creating clarity now, taking care of this problem now, moving forward.
Yeah, Evan, that makes sense to me. I do have one question about the shared access road. So it sounded, the way that what I heard was that if I've got a shared access road, single family home, I can't bring the access road to my driveway. I have to leave a 5-foot buffer between the end of the driveway and my house. Did I hear that right?
So that was the point that somebody tried to make. I don't think that's accurate. You can encroach into a setback, whether it's along a public road or a shared access way, for stoops, porches, entryways. So I think we could make that work. And obviously you need your driveway to connect to your garage. So we can make that work under the ordinance.
Well, the way it's written
Staff's
is,
intent.
the way it's written, it says measured from the private access drive, pedestrian access way, or parking area. So all three of those are a viable option for measuring setback. So if you were to say my access ends at the driveway is simply parking, and I'd like to measure from there, I would think that would be
Eric, can you show
doable.
us an example of like what we're even talking about? Like from a private access to a public access?
Yeah, so instead of, in Stable Ridge was a good example. I think the 530 Court Street across the street is a good example. That house is set back from the road farther than what the form-based code would encourage. If they were to build a new home there, the form-based code would call for that home to be within between 5 and 25 feet from the front setback. The in-town neighborhoods, many of the homes have that form. The neighbors have that form, it looks like. Now, one option might be in a lot like that, if they were trying to develop it, you could have a shared access way that serves the home up front and a home out back. There's a lot of flexibility in how those are laid out. If you have those deeper in-town lots, the intent is to be able to create density on those lots on a shared driveway. And you can't do that if you only allow the front setback to be measured from the street. You'd have to leave all that backland without structures. So that's the intent, is to have that flexibility to measure from that shared access way, so that if somebody chooses to develop their lot, they can develop more units on that parcel without multiple curb cuts on the city street, that it's a shared access way.
And so you had mentioned Stable Ridge, so then under the current zoning, what's the issue?
I don't believe that there is an issue. I think that the diagram and the setbacks as they're written in the ordinance says that you can measure them from the public way or the shared access way or parking. It says that in the diagram. Obviously, there's enough room for arguing about whether or not that's clear, that someone was compelled to file a lawsuit and challenge the planning board's approval of Stable Ridge. We had a petition that proposed changes to add clarity. We think that it needed a little bit of tweaking to be the best language for the city going forward. And I think the ordinance allows you to approve projects the way that you approve Stable Ridge. But I also don't want to try to defend that every time we do a project, because we didn't just take the time to add the clarity that would discourage any different interpretation.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? Okay, so either deliberation amongst the board and/or I will seek a motion.
I do have one point of clarification,
Sure.
and it goes back to Riley's question. The staff recommendation, I think, matches the planning board's motion. With regard to I'll retract the comment I'm about to make. I'm not even going to make it, I guess. I'm not sure it's necessary.
Okay.
I do have one quick question, sorry. There was mention about creating a new, zone code. Would that be through city council, or would that be through us?
Yeah, the T42B was a new code it's a modification essentially of the T42, but it would involve both you and city council, or it could be additional amendments to what we have as T42B if there were other things that the board thought should be different in that district. But it could be initiated by you, council, or petition, and it would certainly involve you in the recommendation, public hearing process, and then the council ultimately deciding what to adopt.
Thank you.
Okay. At this time, I would seek a motion.
I'll go ahead and make the motion to recommend that City Council approve the proposed ordinance amendment attached, including amendments to Section 60-548B-1, intent and purpose setback, Section 60-548B-1, building placement on lot frontage build out for commercial and multifamily, and 30% minimum for single family and two-family homes. This provision does not apply to developments with private shared access ways to more than one structure. Section 548B2, building frontages, T42B table is shown in the attached ordinance amendment. Amendment to the note in the table of principal building placement of Section 60-548B, where adjacent buildings exceeding the maximum setback may be calculated by the average setback of principal structures on adjacent lots. For undeveloped adjacent lots, a setback of 25 feet shall be used for the calculation. Front setback principal, where a private shared access drive is provided serving more than one structure, minimizing access points on the public road, the front setback may be measured from the private access drive, pedestrian access way, or parking area, as shown in the attached ordinance amendment document.
Good job. That was a mouthful. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any deliberation? Okay. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3. Okay. 6. All those opposed? All right. Motion carries. Alrighty, the next item on the agenda we have is a zone map amendment, T4.2B, Area 1. And for those that may or may not have been able to read the staff packet, staff did break out this zone map amendment from Area 1 and Area 2. So we're going to have 2 public comments regarding Area 1. So staff, when we talk about Area A1, can you be very specific about the parcel of land that we are discussing, so that if public comment comes forward, we're directly addressing A1 versus then A2?
Yes.
Yes, and I'll cover the key differences between the maps that you saw last time, the maps that you see this time. And it is a portion of Area A that is not the entirety of Area A. And A1 is this public hearing. Area A2 is the other portion of Area A that you discussed at the last meeting, so they are two separate decisions. The other key difference is that it includes the public or open space parcels at Sherwood Heights and the adjacent parcel owned by the Androscoggin Land Trust as conservation open space, so it's clear to somebody looking at our zoning maps that those are not available for development. And Area A is shown on the maps that have been available since the public notices went out a couple of weeks ago. It includes areas along Broad Street out near South Witham Road, the east side of Broad Street in town to near Sherwood Heights, where you see the conservation open space at the center of the screen, C-OS, and then over to South Main Street and to Loring Avenue at the bottom of the screen, or at the top of the screen, but does not include the Loring Avenue parcel that's been the subject of other zoning changes. That's included in Area A2 for the next decision. It extends out to the south on South Main Street to Vickery Road. The entire area shown here is that blue color for T42B. We did hold the community conversations a week ago last night, Monday, August 1st. We had right around 40 people in attendance. The planning board had asked for those. We had a lot of feedback, similar to what you heard at your public hearing. There are concerns with traffic. There are concerns with having new residents of multifamily homes in traditionally single-family home neighborhoods. And having that change in those neighborhoods. And I think you'll hear from other folks tonight on comments about that change being expanded to these areas. We did talk about something that I don't think was talked about in detail at the last planning board meeting. We do have a mandate from the state under LD 2003 to allow for buildings up to 4 units in every zoning district where homes are allowed. So that's something we're working towards for January. We believe this zoning change achieves that for a pretty significant area that currently doesn't meet that standard. And the other part that was discussed was the T42B uses form to dictate the density. It doesn't set an artificial exact density number. And our urban residential zone, which much of this area is, there's also some LDCR and some rural and suburban residential. Urban residential being the example, if we leave the urban residential as is, we're allowed to build 6 units per acre. LD 2003 will require that we allow 2.5 times that density number of units for affordable developments. So it really incentivizes at 2.5 times, if you allow 6 units per acre, 2.5 times would be 15. 8 of those would be affordable income restricted units and 7 of those would not be. This ordinance without a specific density standard doesn't discourage affordable housing. I think we absolutely need some affordable housing, but it sort of levels the field so the housing could be built at a similar density, but it could be affordable or market rate. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, perfect. Any questions for staff before we open up to public comment?
Just a quick one. Is there a way to overlay the topography on sort of like the Broad Street area? For some reason, that seems very hilly in that blue area right there, and I didn't know if there was a way to overlay that real quickly. I'm just trying to remember going down that road.
I can do it on our regular GIS map, but I don't have actually, I think I can overlay that. I think the layer might be a little bit too opaque to be able to see topography.
So while she's doing that,
Okay.
quick question, like what's kind of driving your thought process with that question?
So there seems to be a lot of focus on pushing T42B down that pathway, down that road, even though during the last conversation that we had last month, there was conversation about if the desire is to try to encourage growth closer to where we would ideally like to petition the Turnpike Authority to put an entryway. Wouldn't it make sense to encourage growth down the rest of South Main Street? And thought that we had asked for an option that included that, and I didn't see that here. Certainly the land in that area, to me, is much more encouraging. You know, it's flat, it's the golf course, it's the other areas that to me would be much more desirable from an infill perspective versus something that is on the side of a hill.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Okay,
was,
no, I appreciate that.
yeah,
Mhm.
that was kind of where I was going with that.
I think as staff, we took that request to be trying to connect areas A and B. Area B was Vickery Road, and there was a small disconnect between Area A and Area B. So when we get to Area B, we'll show you that connection. If we didn't hit what you were looking for, we could certainly look at tabling part of that and coming back with a different map. We have been working on a water and sewer study for the entirety of South Auburn and the Washington Street corridor. And the areas that we're talking about now are the phase 1 and 2 areas where we think we could reasonably expect to be able to extend water and sewer. And then down South Main Street to the golf course would be another later phase, but it's certainly possible.
In that same discussion that Dave is referencing, and I thought the planning board was quite clear this last time as well as last year when they asked for that specific option. So I'm not sure where those guys got crossed. The other part of that was not just that it be extended, that we be given an option to consider extending down South Main Street, but explicitly that those sections of Broad Street south of the intersection of Broad and Mill be excluded. I still don't have a good understanding of why those were included. If we're looking at areas that are in proximity to water and sewer, and Davis right, it's hilly. It's very hilly in spots. I think to the point where you would be prohibited from building based on ordinance and a maximum grade. So why is that section included? And not asking, I'm not saying why didn't you include it after we asked you not to. I'm saying why is that included to begin with?
Yeah, if you asked us not to, I'm sorry that it's still there in the draft maps, but because the comp plan recommended it as traditional neighborhood development, and that as sort of an infill between the Washington Street corridor, which we have significant transportation plans for, and plans for mixed-use development along the Washington Street corridor on the northbound side. And those will work better if we can create the density in other areas where water and sewer would have to be extended. We're more likely to be able to entice the investment that would pay for those utility extensions. So,
does that include road improvement? I mean, so I'm thinking, I grew up on the hill in New Auburn. I grew up on Enfield Street, and I think about South Main Street. The first house that I purchased in Auburn was on Broad Street, kind of right at the bottom of Miriam Drive across the street. And I think about those two streets, and even if you were to think about the roads themselves, South Main is a much better road all the way to the Turnpike than Broad Street is out to Hackett, which is a small connector to Washington. And then you're only getting on there one way, right? When you want to pull into Washington, I just don't. I understand that it could possibly be used for to entice future investment. I just think it would require a lot of investment to make it feasible to begin with. Running water and sewer out there, it would be a dead end. You're actually going downhill during certain parts of that. You know what I mean? I guess I just don't understand.
yeah, so water would be a looped system. And we can certainly provide those studies. We just recently got that latest information back from the consultant. Sewer would most likely either be pumped into Broad Street or would drain back towards Washington Street and go through an existing pump station. But a lot of that area would have to be pumped through an existing pump station or a new one, and certainly would, depending on what's generated for traffic, would require transportation improvements. And we are working on a study scope for the Washington Street corridor that would hope to vet a lot of those things out. So I don't think it's especially the Broad Street corridor without public sewer is not something we'll see developed right away in a T42B format. But it is something that people could start to plan for, and we could sort of pull together projects that could eventually fund that type of an extension.
So I'm hearing that this was included as sort of forward thinking. So I guess I have a question about that forward thinking. You're mentioning being tied into Washington Street. There's an active rail line between Broad and Washington Street. Do we have the ability to?
Yeah, Hackett Road is that connection. And there is, in the long term, an envisioned connection that's been in the comp plan for a couple of iterations.
There's a road connection. I'm just wondering, how do we run sewer across a railroad?
Yeah, it would come either Hackett Road, and some of the utilities would loop on Witham Road, and some of them may even run along the edge of the turnpike to get back to where they cross the river to go to the treatment plant in Lewiston. We have a number of
looping back to
options.
Witham Road, which would lead us back to South Main, would make more sense to start. I'm done. I guess I've made my point.
Yeah, there's a number of
My
different
opinion clear.
options, and water and sewer would potentially take different paths because of gravity versus pressure. And we
Right.
could certainly share those studies with you.
Is Witham Road the if you're heading out South Main, the right just before you go over the turnpike? Is that? So if we're doing a loop, wouldn't we potentially go down South Main, take a right onto Witham, and then go back up Rod?
This is what I'm saying.
Yep, eventually it
makes no
would.
sense.
Eventually it would.
All righty, any other questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, I will seek a motion to open up public comment.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Excellent, perfect. Okay, so again, podium, 5 minutes, state your name. And again, this is regarding the map amendment 4.2B Area 1. So come on, and if you have any questions or comments, come to the podium.
Evening, Mike Adler, 82 Loring Avenue. We've been going at this now every couple of weeks, getting a little tiring. We've been fighting this for, as far as I can remember, 1976, this multifamily housing and denser housing in this area. Yeah, there is a housing shortage, but it's caused by about three things. One, people stay in their homes, and they bought their homes in these areas because they were a single-family home, and they considered it their lifetime home. My folks were in their home for 54 years. I was on Paul Street for 31, and I'm on Loring for 16 as of now. Whether that remains to be my forever home, I don't know. Depends what happens with this zoning. The other thing is, we have people coming from out of town because the housing market where they live now either is non-existent or it's too expensive for them. And the home prices here in Auburn are much more affordable. So they come here and they buy here. So there's a bunch of different things that are causing this housing problem. But I don't think it's our responsibility as a city to provide housing for people who want to buy here. If the house is for sale, that's fine. We don't need to be cutting into people's lots, making smaller lots, adding more housing, moving housing back closer to the road. My house is 30 feet off the road. I have no problem with that. Matter of fact, I like it. It's right now I have people walking dogs down the street. Some of them let them crap on my lawn. They pick it up, and when they don't, I take a bag out to them, here, please pick it up. So if you start putting these houses 5 feet from the road, or in that area, within that area, you've got people looking right in your house. I mean, if I wanted that, I'd move downtown here, somewhere to a house on one of these streets that was that close to the road. I don't think we need to be developing houses. Our zoning has worked good for all these years that I can remember, since I bought my house in 1976. There's nothing wrong with it. Provides for a 100 by 100 lot, 30-foot setback, 7 foot on the sides, 15 feet from the rear. And if you want to have a house close to somebody like that, that's fine. That's what my first house was. I have a house now that has a little more land with it. I like it the way it is. I don't see the need to change this. To me, these changes are just an end run around for the city to get their way to change the zoning. As an example, we have a project up the hill here. The petition of 2,400 people signed it. It was ignored. It was T4.2. They did an end run around, and he came back with T4.2B. Passed. Just recently, 37 Loring Avenue, 25 signature petition was accepted. That started all this stuff with changing the zoning in this area. The outcome of that is yet to be determined. If somebody wants to do something like that, what I'm suggesting is on A2, leave our area alone. Do not change the zoning. Leave it as the current zoning on A2. If somebody wants to change that or do something with a piece of property, let them go around and get a petition from the abutters and people within 500 feet of that area that they want to rezone or change whatever they need to change, and have the signatures of the people from that area. Because the first petition on this 37 Loring, there was not one person from that area. They're all from a different area. So my suggestion to the planning board, leave us alone. It's worked well for all these years. Leave our area urban residential. If somebody wants to change something, let them go through the variance or zoning appeals board or whatever the process may be, but also get a petition signed by the people from the area that it affects. Thank you.
Excellent. That was right to the second. Julie? All right. Anyone else from the public who would like to come forward?
Good evening. My name is Ed Barra. I live at 29 Marston Hill Road. I'm here tonight on behalf of the Skelton Family Trust, and if I could, I'll just point out the properties that the Skelton Family Trust owns on Broad Street, since it's come up as a... All right. Thanks. So, 4 parcels. It's a couple hundred acres. We've sat on that for the last 25 years waiting for something to happen. We now have to make something happen ourselves. Under the current zoning designation, which is rural residential, I think the minimum frontage is 200 or 250 feet. There's not a lot that we can do, except, I think, underdevelop that property by putting house lots along those roads, which isn't probably the best use of the property, especially in light of your historic discussions about having backland be available for development. But we really can't afford to build million-dollar roads. So we'd like the opportunity to develop that in a more dense fashion, if you will. But the market will dictate what that'll be. There won't be sewer water out there for a while, but there will be possibility of some greater development than merely 1 acre lots cookie cuttered along the road. So I'd like you to keep that proposal as is. I think your comments, Mr. Sear and Mr. Trask, make sense, but in the future, who knows? So what harm is there? If there's not a market for lots out there, then there won't be lots. So I don't see the harm in keeping it in the configuration that the staff has proposed here, and I would urge you not to change that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public like to come forward? Okay, seeing none, and seek a motion to close public comment.
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Excellent. All those in favor? Great. Motion carries. Okay. Any questions that people would like to address from the public? And then if none, we can have questions, comments, deliberation, and obviously engage staff. Are you going to make that clarifying point? Yeah.
Yeah. I heard leave things as they are because it's working fine. I understand LD 2003 will not leave things as they are. Is that accurate?
It will require that the city change the ordinances to comply with LD 2003, which would allow multifamily homes in any residential zoning district.
So if no changes are made, and then when LD 2003 comes forward, what does it mean for?
So, yeah, we're being given a deadline to bring all of our ordinances into compliance with LD 2003 of January 1st. This moves a large portion of the city into compliance with that allowance for multifamily homes. We will be bringing you other zoning changes as we approach January 1st. There's not a specific identified penalty or LD 2003 police that will come to Auburn on January 1st, but I think we have to demonstrate that we're moving well in that direction as we approach January 1st, and this is one piece of that. And I think the comments from Mr. Sear and Mr. Trask make a lot of sense. The comp plan does support eventual utility extensions and changes in zoning along that, just everything north of the turnpike, essentially. It's just that through the water and sewer studies, phase one of that is a loop in water from South Main Street down Vickery to the existing line on Riverside, which encompasses a large portion of Area A. And phase 2 to 3 of that is out Broad Street back to Hackett and tying into Washington Street. Other phases would provide utilities to the other areas, and part of what we've tried to do is sort of target the changes to match the likely extensions, but also to limit the number of property owners that we have to notify for any one meeting. We have, I think, 11 items on the agenda tonight, and we'd be happy to add one for a future one, but to try to add more to this agenda just would have been challenging based on sheer numbers of people that might be here, and we might not have space for them.
Okay.
So
go ahead.
this is just making the land available and not having a promise that a developer is going to develop it.
Yeah, just like today, each landowner would have to decide how they want to use their land. They would have some additional flexibility for density with the zoning change, as well as different setback standards. And it's a different ordinance with more flexibility, but no landowner has to change the way they use their land.
And if anyone wanted to create 3 or more lots or bring a project that would be a special exception, it would still need to come back here for review before the planning board.
So I guess I'd like to hear from Dave and Evan, your thoughts. I think you did call to question some of the planning, right? And some of, how the map was designed. So I guess I want to hear your thoughts and yeah. Do you think it could be improved upon? Do you feel like there's, additional considerations?
I guess for me, having not attended last year's request when this was brought up and this was the initial conversation, and then we did it again, and we were questioning why. I mean, obviously, it sounds like it's in line with potential, water and where things are. I guess there's a part of me that feels that a good chunk of this blue is in the wrong spot.
I guess that's what I'm thinking too. And I don't know why maybe staff didn't lead with the idea that going down South Main Street isn't phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3 apparently, and extending city water and city sewer, because there's some kind of desire to create a connector out to Washington Ave. And I guess in light of that, it would make sense to include Broad Street. I think it would make sense to include Broad Street at a later date, though. I just personally think that the South Main Street corridor has more potential for infill development. And as Dave pointed out, all you have to do is drive down the two roads and you can see the difference. And I understand, was it Mr. Barrow? I understand Mr. Barrow's point, but he's right. By the time you get out there, it does start to flatten out, and you get to that intersection. I guess, ultimately, I'm not fundamentally opposed to this being out along Broad Street. I am just going to end up at some point this meeting or next meeting making a motion that we initiate a zone change for down South Main Street as well, so.
Yeah, I kind of saw that coming. So I am in agreement with you, right? Like, I feel like if we still have some questions about this, if it feels not like it's not settled, then I don't feel comfortable moving forward with it.
Evan, are you saying that it would be better if South Main and Broad were included on this? Because it sounded like that was the issue, was the number of. Because if South Main were to be taken up in a separate thing, does it have to be taken up on this same zone change, or would you want it?
No, I don't think it does. Having heard from staff about the plan for city water and city sewer, I think is important, and understanding that there's a specific future development plan that the city has is important. It's a little annoying that we're hearing about it as members of the planning board right now for the first time after we've brought this particular subject up many times. I'm personally miffed there. Having heard what staff says, I can understand why Broad Street got included here. I'm saying, fine, we can include Broad Street. I don't see any development going on down on Broad Street. If the idea is that we want to be able to provide an extension of that neighborhood, the natural extension is along South Main Street. So I don't necessarily have an objection to Broad Street at this point. What I have is an objection to the fact that what we asked for wasn't presented, I guess. Riley, I guess I'm kind of having a little tantrum. I'll be honest and I'll own it. Having heard from staff, I think I understand why they included Broad Street, and it does make sense. I just know that I'm going to want the rest included at some point.
Yeah, so you're not opposed to this, you just wish that South Main was part of the, yeah.
Well, so then, okay. Any other conversation? You can always make a motion to not make a favorable recommendation with a condition, right? And we can bring it back to staff.
So I think what we're asking for is if there's an objection, a clear objection to this area, which is not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing the area should be bigger. If you table it with a recommendation that we add another 1,000 acres all the way to the turnpike, then we're going to have to invite 2,500 people to your next meeting. We're trying to do this incrementally in an order that we think utilities could be extended, and also in pieces that are small enough that we think we can accommodate the public response in this room and the room across the hall. So, I mean, staff's recommendation is that this change is consistent with the plan. We could continue, we could have workshop added to the next meeting to cover the transportation and the water sewer extensions in greater detail. But the phase 1, 2 water sewer extensions kind of match the areas that we've shown here. And as you move away from Rodman Road, across Washington Street, over to South Main Street, and then to the turnpike, there's less certainty about where a future connector road might sit. So we were concerned about having development over towards the turnpike that would get in the way of a future connector road. But we are proposing a more detailed feasibility study through Androscoggin Transportation Resource Center. We had the concept approved last Thursday. We're coming up with an exact scope and a cost estimate. We'll be proposing that for funding, but we will be getting more information on the transportation infrastructure. This is a general sketch. As you can see, it gets wider as you go across South Main Street. And we just want to make sure we don't encourage somebody to build a bunch of houses that then prevents the city from being able to build an eventual connector road. So we don't have good east-west access in Auburn from Minot Avenue, Washington Street, over to the turnpike. We think that's important long-term, but we don't have enough information to tell you exactly where it would go.
Excuse me. Eric, could you define long-term when in regards to the Turnpike Authority considering an area? Are we talking decades, half a decade? What are we looking at?
Yeah, and I don't even know if it would include the turnpike. So some additional east-west connector from Minot Avenue towards the turnpike. The city had put forward a plan to have another turnpike interchange a number of years ago to accommodate industrial commercial development. There's a lot more appetite towards infill development than there is, expanding or creating a new mall or industrial area for federal permitting. So the comp plan calls for this area to be an infill residential area that has a lot more merit from a state and federal standard, but there's no funding in place yet. It's decades before there's a new turnpike exit.
All right, so I guess I'm just looking for clarification. Are we kind of putting ourselves in a catch-22 when you're discussing we don't necessarily want to inhabit an area that would end up being a prime location for such a throughway or a connector or whatever, but we have no idea when that may happen. Is that correct? Am I understanding you correctly?
We don't have a timeline for the construction. We do have a planned timeline for having the information to know where it would be most feasible in the future, and then being able to protect that corridor from development that would get in the way of it.
What is that time frame?
So we had the concept of the funding approved last Thursday. We're making the request to the state. We should have a feasibility scope, study scope, done in the next week or two, and hopefully that gets blessed through Androscoggin Transportation Resource within the next month, and then hopefully over the next year or so we would conduct that study.
So with that information, we could actually have more targeted areas with a more finite revision to the zoning map at that time. Is that a reasonable expectation?
Yes, and I also think there is room to expand it beyond what we're talking about, but it would be something similar to this red outlined area. That's a very broad chance of where that might be located, and we were saving that discussion for later.
Thank you very much.
At this point, I'm more worried about looking at where infill makes sense and extending that new Auburn neighborhood. than worrying about the turnpike. To my recollection, we've been talking about this for at least 3 decades, which would have made me about 10, 11 years old. So I'm sure it was talked about before that. I just don't remember. I mean,
Just don't want to put the cart before the horse.
yeah, and
That's all.
I understand growth in this area. I'm not worried about a pipe dream of a turnpike exit necessarily, but the growth in the area would make it more feasible.
Alrighty. Any other questions, comments? If not, I will seek a motion.
I got this one.
I'm sorry?
I make a motion to recommend amending the official zoning map of the City of Auburn entitled City of Auburn Zoning Map dated May 16th, 2016, revised through its current date and revisions as provided under Section 60-5 of the zoning ordinance to rezone certain land area from the urban residence, multifamily suburban neighborhood business zoning, low-density rural residence zoning, and low-density country residence zoning districts to the traditional neighborhood form-based code T42B, zoning district and conservation/open space district. This item is pursuant to Chapter 60, Article 17, Division 2 of the Code of Ordinances. The official zoning map amendment has been and is available for review and inspection at the city clerk's office in the planning and permitting department. The area is generally located in the New Auburn area near South Main and Broad Streets and Vickery Road as shown on the attached map A1.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, do I have any discussion about the motion? Okay, seeing none, I'll take a vote. All those in favor? 1, 2, okay. All those opposed? Okay, motion carries.
Who was the second on that one? I missed that.
Darren, right? Yeah. All righty, moving on to the next agenda item. Where's my agenda? Okay. All right, so still in the same area, right? So we had divided Area 1 and Area 2. So again, a zoning map amendment, T4.2B, Area 2, and I'll leave it up to staff.
Thank you. So as we were talking about before, Area A2 is the second part of the original Area A. It cuts off at Loring, where Loring Ave and South Main Street meet. That's where it picks up from Area A1. And it runs down to Riverside Drive. It includes 3 parcels as part of conservation open space, and those include Houston Field, a parcel owned by Androscoggin Land Trust, and Oak Hill Cemetery. And then T42B picks up again, changing from the proposed change would be from multifamily suburban zoning to and urban residential zoning to T4.2B along Riverside Drive. So this was split up again because it's a large area, and there was some discussion about a parcel on Loring Ave that had been brought up previously for a zone change. So we thought that this was an area that we could divide up the two so you could make a determination separately.
Okay, excellent. Any questions for staff before I open up to public comment?
Is the space to the right of the new blue conservation space landlocked? It looked like it is. That's good. It kind of looks like a diamond.
Okay.
Yeah, and
I'm
the
going to go to the other zoning map to see.
I think that parcel has access on Riverside, but we'll double check. Yeah, it's split between a few zones, but it does have access on the riverside.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, I will seek a motion to open up public comment.
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second?
All right, all those in favor? Excellent, okay, so those that would like to come and speak to Area 2, go to the podium, 5 minutes, state your name and your address.
D. Chapman, 40 Vivian Street. Really quick, I didn't want to say all this, but we are all night, that's all I've been hearing, is that we're putting the cart before the horse. We don't have any, everything is just tabled or late, you know, they just prolong it. Like, there was no significant language, and we're all voting on this, not knowing what it's going to look like. So with that, the LTD, we mentioned, someone made a comment at the public meeting that's Eric, and you can clarify it. She spoke about it doesn't have to, right? The state, I'm asking you to help me, the LTD 2003.
Yeah, LD 2003.
That's from the state. It's not saying that municipalities have to, right? That was clarified at the last meeting. A few of us were there. I just want clarification on that.
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll take your public comment, and then when public comment closes, here, I'll stop it real quick. When it closes, then he'll address that question.
Okay, because a lady did make a statement, and she actually serves on the state, at the state, and so we'll clarify that, and I'm hoping the right language is given. If not, I'll be back again. So I don't think I need to remind everybody, but in June and July, the planning board voted not to rezone 37 Loring. The city council, 2 readings, voted not to rezone 37 Loring, just for the next night for us to see it on this map. I'm sure we're all fairly aware of that. So with that, we ask that you exclude area, which was A1 the night, this is getting all confusing, Lord help us. First night it was A1, 37 Loring. Now tonight it's A2. So please bear with me. We're asking for that to be removed. I'd almost ask that that whole neighborhood, I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever been down there. These maps are so confusing. So actually be removed. We've already stated, and everybody voted, that 37 Loring should be removed. Walton Field, all that, I think the zoning, they did not make no mistake. Leave the zoning as it is, please. They made no mistake when they did the zoning in this neighborhood. They did it for a reason. That land that we're talking about, 37 Loring, abuts the property that is in landlocked. Okay, so that's it. That whole, it literally is part of the landlocked, except that 15 acres is not in the landlocked. But if you went and looked at the geographic of it, so I'd ask that that be removed, and we urge you that to remove that, because then it just feels like we were slapped in the face. We've been battling this. You guys spoke. The city council spoke. I don't even know how we're here. And with that, I also want to state that why aren't we caring about the people that were born and raised in these neighborhoods? We were born and raised in these areas, but yet we're going to lay out the red carpet for developers to come in and ruin our neighborhood. I don't know if all of you heard on the news last week in Sanford, a grandfather and a grandson were hit and killed by a car. The first thing that the lady in the neighborhood said, and I quote, because I wrote it all down. She said, since this development has gone in down the road, the traffic has been awful and people are flying by, taking no consideration of our once quiet community. This is what we're going to be looking at. This 2 people died because other people from other towns are not going to respect the community, the roads, like we do in our community. We take care of each other. So I would ask that you, once again, make a recommendation and take that whole zoning right up that baby blue, wherever it went, I'd ask for that to be taken out. I'd also ask that if you could definitely take out the Loring Ave. I'm not saying don't do nothing with the property. Leave the zoning where it is. And it's zoned for for single-family homes. It was mentioned at the last meeting. You can put a duplex there. Do that. Don't come in and destroy our neighborhood up against a field that isn't landlocked, and it was meant for cross-country skiing, people to enjoy, walk their dogs. This is a neighborhood. I mean, I don't hear us talking about up by the golf course, you know, on the other side of Washington Ave. Let's make some development there. Like, I really think we need to start caring about the people that were born and raised in these neighborhoods. This is our home.
Your time is up. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ryan Smith. I live at 14 Weaver Street. I had some points about LD 2003 because it pertains to this zoning change. When you talk about the affordable housing density bonus, developers can have 2.5 times the density if 50% or more of their units are designated for affordable rates over the next 30 years. However, when you look at the state guidance given about LD 2003 on page 5, it does state that that affordable housing density bonus is only allowed where multifamily buildings are allowed. That definition of multifamily, if you go to page 7, says 3 or more units. Under urban residential, only up to 2 units per building is allowed. Therefore, these neighborhoods are not subject to the affordable housing density bonus as they are zoned now. But if you change this, again, another implication is all of these neighborhoods are now subject to a 2.5 times density multiplier. So something unique about T4.2B is T4.2 had a 16 units per acre limit, whereas T4.2B doesn't have one. Our comprehensive plan says 16 units an acre, I believe. So that would mean that if you change the zoning, they could do 40 units per acre. A half an acre, 20 units, and you cannot implement your parking standards because now the state dictates how much parking that you can require them to have, which means they will park on the street of a single-family neighborhood. So if you make this change into all these areas, really, you are now allowing this density multiplier where it's currently not allowed, because under LD 2003, it's only allowed where 3 or more units are allowed per building, in which it's not now under urban residential. And I quoted exactly where I got that from. In addition, when it says 4 units per parcel, it says 4 dwelling units per parcel. Nowhere does it say that we have to allow multifamily units wherever water and sewer is. It actually says only designated growth areas in the comprehensive plan. I didn't have enough time to look it up if this is a designated growth area or not. But even if so, it doesn't say how you have to accomplish those units. It could be 4 single families, it could be 2 duplexes, could be 1 4-unit building. Nowhere in LD 2003 have I seen anything, and I just read through the law again, I just read through the state's guidance again. Nowhere does it say that it has to be within 1 building. So you could have a single family only zone, and you have to allow them to put 4 units on it if they meet the minimum area per unit. So it's not just any old, 1/10 of an acre parcel. If it's a 1/4 acre parcel per unit, they have to have 1 acre. You have to allow them to put 4 units on it. But again, it doesn't say how they have to accomplish that. It might be in the final rules, but we don't have the final rules of LD 2003 yet. But for some reason, municipalities have to have these rules in place by New Year. So riddle me that. So I would ask that we just stop sending out these notifications. I mean, we don't even have the details of the connector road. I resonate with those issues of not even knowing the details of that. Yet we're having a public hearing, and we spent thousands of dollars last month to send public notifications to people, and we're sending thousands of dollars of notifications for this month, and we still don't even know where the connector road is going to be, but we're still tampering with the zoning. So I don't get what the issue is with just tabling it, doing a workshop, and getting these details around so we can make an informed decision. I don't get the radicalness of that request. But that's what I would request, because every time we do this and keep doing it over and not having an answer, it would be much better to workshop this for 3 months and then send out public notification, rather than public notify for 4 months in a row and waste thousands, tens of thousands of taxpayer money on these notifications. In addition, I would like to hear more about the planning board's concerns about rezoning, because when we heard this a couple months ago for the Loring Ave parcel, concerns were brought forth by the planning board for getting fire trucks down there and other issues, very valid public safety issues, and I would love to hear those again from those planning board members, because it just seemed like a couple months ago we were all against rezoning one parcel because of public safety, but now we can do a whole zone and there's nothing unsafe about that. So to me, I don't know where we lost that part of the conversation in a matter of 2 months, or what information was given at a public meeting to satisfy those concerns. Because if it was gathered from outside of a public meeting, that would be ex parte communications. And that's against the rules. I would also say the community feedback part of this is not completed. The process starts when you include the community, and as far as I'm concerned, that's
I'm sorry, your time is up.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
That's fine.
This is Pam Russo, 745 West Auburn Road. I just have a question. So wherever you do the connector road, if for some reason it is in the wrong spot, or if somebody's living in the wrong spot, then they get to, by public domain, take any houses that are along that spot, right? Because that's where they're going to build their road. So I would err on the side of caution, because that's not cool.
All right, any other members from the public would like to come forward? Okay, seeing none, I will make a motion or seek a motion to close public comment.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Excellent. Okay, and we do have some questions from the public, so I'll open up to the board.
I have a general T42B question. When it was originally developed, maybe even going back to T42.
Wait, real quick, Dave, can we address the ones from the public?
Yeah, well, it's actually, it is
okay,
tied.
cool.
It is
Awesome.
tied. Yeah,
Okay.
no, it is tied. So it's tied to the street parking and the street congestion and that type of thing. Is there any information, study, whatever, that was considered that as we build in and infill and make things more congested and allow for more and more people, what is needed with regard to parking, width of streets, making things walkable, encouraging that type of thing? You know, was that addressed? Because certainly I know a lot of these streets are relatively narrow and a lot of people walk them, and I just want to make sure we address that.
It is being addressed, sometimes on a street or neighborhood scale. We have plans for Court Street improvements. I think a big part of the infill development and the new value is a source of revenues that we can address those things. And also, depending on the amount of traffic that a given development generates, we can have the developer build some of those missing connections to where we have that infrastructure. But we are looking to address that in a planned way, but also in a way that allows the development to pay for those improvements incrementally over time. That's easier to do if you start near existing city infrastructure and build your way out than it is if you start at the end and try to build back to the existing connectivity. But that will be a major part of development reviews and transportation planning efforts that the city's working on as we infill those. We also think that showing that Auburn is open to new housing and meeting the state's goals will line us up better for access to funding from the state or federal government to extend infrastructure if we're showing that we're helping the state achieve their housing goals.
Okay, any other questions from the public? Okay, so we didn't.
I actually.
Go ahead.
Mr. Smith's question was a good one. I was not at that meeting, and I did have a chance to go back and watch it, and I was surprised that those were sort of used as findings. I would have assumed that the finding would have been rejection of rezoning because there was already a rezoning process in place, and it didn't make sense to rezone something once and then possibly rezone it again. I will probably make myself unpopular with some folks in the room. I mean, I grew up in the neighborhood. With regard to safety, the fire department is like right there. I mean, literally right there. I don't ever recall an instance where the fire truck had an issue getting down the road, even when there were people parked on the side. I grew up on Enfield Street, which is narrower than Loring. So that was a question that was brought up. I think that's one that deserves being addressed by folks that made those comments during that meeting.
So the multifamily, what is it? So the green is now, we want to do the T42B, and then we have the open space. There was some talk from Ryan as well about, so right now he's saying that in that multifamily that we can't build, but the LD 2003, we can have a lot of units. Can you clarify what's allowed now and what?
LD 2003 requires us to make our zoning ordinance compliant with the law, LD 2003, as well as the rules. That includes within our growth areas and in places where we don't have an identified growth area, or communities where we don't within the state. If they have water and sewer, they're also required to meet certain mandates from LD 2003. And one of those is requiring that we allow up to 4 units on a lot that is vacant where a single-family home is allowed. That is one of the requirements of it. There are a number of other requirements for where we allow people to add a second unit or a third unit. We could certainly go over those in more detail as we start to make those changes, but it's our opinion that this district makes us more compliant in the lands where this applies, and that it doesn't, instead of creating a really high density, I think he said something like 45, we think it kind of does something different in that it doesn't create an artificial maximum density standard that then gets multiplied by 2.5. It allows the same density for market rate units as it does for affordable or income restricted units. As they were going through the rulemaking process, they almost said that form-based codes without a density set are not allowed just because they really wanted to encourage those affordable units over market rate units. They didn't pass that, so we believe it still works, that this ordinance would allow flexibility for all types of units, not just affordable units.
Okay, so I wasn't at the meeting, the community conversation. So there was state representation, the question around LD 2003 and the applicability of it?
So I think State Representative Kathy Shaw was there. I don't think she was there as a state representative. She was there as a resident of Auburn, but we could ask her that, I guess. She, I believe, said that LD 2003 doesn't mandate that a property owner do anything different with their property. I think she said it mandates that a city allow certain things should a property owner choose to do them. And I know we had some board members there that probably heard that comment too, but I think it was getting at, it doesn't mandate that a property owner chooses to use their property differently. It just mandates the city allow a property owner those additional choices.
So if we're at the T42B, are our standards making it for less housing, or does LD 2003 make it for more housing?
I think you could implement ordinance changes that are compliant with LD 2003 and not allow all of the same things that T42B does. Or you could implement them in a way that allows more than T42B, but I think T42B brings us closer to compliance, but it doesn't require that we allow for, say, 10-unit buildings. The T42B does allow for that, and I think that was intentional to try to get the land costs down for housing and create more flexibility. So in that sense, I would say T42B is more flexible than what LD 2003 requires, but I think that was very intentional, and the comp plan says that we're striving for mixed housing types in these areas.
I think a concern too, as brought up by the public, is the Loring Ave that was denied by us and City Council. Looking at this map with that included is a concern. Factoring other potential areas, I think.
You think including it is a concern? I would argue that if we didn't include it, that would be spot zoning, which would be illegal, which is zoning an individual parcel to either advantage or disadvantage an owner, or lot owner. And so it's not without merit, but there's only merit if you say that the entirety of that area should not be rezoned. But to leave out the single lot, which is currently a residential lot, and to rezone all of the other residential lots around it something different would essentially be I think that there would be legal action taken against that by the lot owner, and they would argue that it was spot zoning and disadvantage them specifically.
And that was gonna be my next question with legal. So it's either revisit the map or deny or approve with how it is, correct?
Yeah, you could tell us that you don't want to take an action tonight on approving it, and that you want us to bring back some kind of an amended map. My understanding was that there were some board members, as well as some counselors, that voted against that proposal because they preferred this plan that the city had already set in motion last year after the adoption of the comp plan, over a small single lot developer driven petition, that this was a larger area consideration. So that's why we've kept it in, but we can certainly amend this map and bring it back if there are amendments that the board wants to see. But I would share Evan Sears' concerns that what are the reasons, because the comp plan designate those as the same.
But from the current zoning to the proposed change, it kind of cuts off. So you have, on the proposed change, you have the open space, and then it turns into urban residential. And then I just don't, if we can change it from the current zoning to the proposed change, I don't know what the difference in your spot zoning would make. Like, I don't understand, because if the green on this side turns into urban residential.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Do you know what I mean? Then what keeps that piece of parcel to go dark blue?
On the conservation open space? The conservation open space is owned by the Androscoggin Land Trust, and they have conservation easements on it. So you're not disadvantaging the Androscoggin Land Trust by putting their land in conservation open space, because they've already placed conservation easements on it. Whereas, so I was at that meeting too. One of the things that was discussed was, what if the Androscoggin Land Trust were to purchase that 37 Loring Ave and put easements on it, and then there'd be a petition to rezone it to conservation open space. So you can do things like that, so long as you aren't sort of disadvantaging or taking away, rights of an individual parcel owner like that. But that's why that can be conservation open space. It's already got conservation easements on it. You can't build on it anyway, so.
Yeah, and I just want to remind the board, we've had this maps in front of us for a year from now, you know what I mean? So again, I'm going back to my personal opinion. If we're still having conversations, if we still have not come to the table with some confidence of my personal opinion, right, as a board member, that we feel comfortable with this zoning, that's why I'm not moving forward with it, because we're a year into this, and we are still having this discussion. So, I mean, we can continue to have this discussion, but if we're still having questions, then at what point in time do we say it makes sense or it doesn't make sense?
I mean, I think that makes sense as an individual members of the board, and I think everyone needs to vote in accordance with whether or not they feel comfortable doing it. But
I was just expressing my opinion on how I felt. All right, any other thoughts? Any other questions, right? So this is before us. If not, I'd ask for a motion. And I forget, as the board is contemplating the motion and or moving forward with it, how long do we have in which we have to make a motion? If not, it passes with?
I don't think we have an exact deadline.
No, time frame, right? So if we're quiet for a half an hour, like it just passes.
If we're quiet for a half an hour, it passes.
I thought I'd heard that.
No,
like there's a certain time frame.
If there is no motion on the floor, it is the purview of the chair running the meeting to simply move on and say there was no motion, no action taken.
And then does the motion then pass?
No, it dies.
No. Okay.
The item dies.
I'm sorry, it does?
The item dies.
Oh, the item dies. Okay. All right, so I will ask for a motion. Eric, the look on your face was so funny.
Can this board be quiet for 30 minutes?
Well, in an effort to make people take a vote instead of simply move on without making comment, we'll make the motion. I make a motion to recommend amending the official zoning map of the City of Auburn entitled City of Auburn Zoning Map dated May 16, 2016, revised through its current date and revisions as provided under Section 60-5 of the zoning ordinance to rezone certain land area from urban residence zoning district and the multifamily suburban zoning district to the traditional neighborhood form-based code T-4.2B zoning district and the conservation open space zoning district as shown on the attached map. This item is pursuant to Chapter 60, Article 17, Division 2 of the Code of Ordinances. The official zoning map amendment is available for review and inspection at the city clerk's office and the planning and permitting department. This area is generally located near South Main, Loring, Mary Carroll, and 7th Streets as shown on the attached map.
Okay, do you have a second?
Second.
Okay, do I have any discussion about the motion? All right, seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? So, okay, all those opposed? So motion fails. I'm trying to think if we need to have a second motion, just thinking about the whole Stable Ridge situation. All right, so next item on the agenda is, again, zoning map amendment T4.2B, areas B1 and B2.
Actually, before we move on, do we need to do that?
Yeah.
We need to have the second motion now, correct? This is something we ran into previously.
Oh.
If, failure to approve a motion doesn't constitute an action, so if clearly there were fewer people in support than in favor, so if we could get a motion to recommend that you don't approve it in a vote, then that would be clear without any question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Can I ask him a question?
Sure, yep, okay. Thank you, Evan.
And we ran into that findings of fact before. Is that something?
We've recommended reasons for approval. If you have reasons why you do not want to approve it, and clearly that's the way the board voted, we would encourage you to explain those as part of the motion.
I believe it actually came back to us once because we failed to provide findings of fact for a denial, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I believe it was a project approval rather than a zoning change, but there's a similar standard for you to give reasons on a zoning change.
Okay. So just to kind of circle back, so at this point in time, we would be looking for a motion to not approve, right? So Evan had made a motion to approve, it failed. Now we're looking to then have a motion to a non-favorable recommendation to the zone change.
I'll go ahead and add the word not then. So I make a motion to not recommend amending the official zone map of the City of Auburn, titled City of Auburn Zone Map dated May 16, 2016, revised to its current date and revisions as provided under Section 60-5 of the zoning ordinances to rezone certain land area from the urban residential zoning district and the multifamily suburban zoning district to the traditional neighborhood form-based code T42B zoning district and the conservation open space zoning district as shown on the attached map. This item is pursuant to Chapter 60, Article 17, Division 2 of the Code of Ordinances. The official zoning map amendment is available for review and inspection at the city clerk's office and the planning and permitting department. This area is generally located near South Main, Loring, Mary Carroll, and 7th Streets as shown on the attached map.
All right, do you have a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Okay, all those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Alrighty. All right, next item on the agenda, number 7, zoning map amendment T 4.2B, areas B1 and B2, and I'll hand it over to staff.
Thank you. So B1, area B1 and B2 are both presented as the same item for you to consider with one public comment session, but they were presented as two different sections, B1 and B2, so you could consider them independently. Area B1 is the Vickery Road neighborhood. It was previously known as just Area B. We now made it into Area B1, and it includes just the urban residence zoning district part of it. And B2, we added along the low-density country residence zoning district along Vickery Road. And the reason we did that was to provide a connection to Area A1. And what we did, how we provided this connection is we did a 700 foot strip along from the center of Vickery Road and then along Carrier Court. This is one way that we can do it. We could also pursue considering a different option for area B2 if that's not favorable to the board. But this is for your consideration. It's the best one we could think of at the moment. We're happy to reconsider and also happy to take any questions.
I have a quick question. Am I correct in reading this correctly? The proposed change is split zoning some lots. That's exactly what it looks like, isn't it?
Yeah, it would split some lots between T-4.2B and low density country residents.
But that was in an effort to connect it to the area A1 that we were asking for at the last meeting.
Correct.
So in that case, why wasn't all of the low density, rather than splitting the lot, why wasn't that green area just considered the entire thing?
You know, we did consider it, and we thought that was a large area to put before you. We also considered a 100-foot strip along the road. So this is really just an effort to put something before you, and I think Evan's going to say something.
No, I was just laughing because this area is actually not larger than any of the others. So I was just kind of, I understand what you were thinking. Perhaps, again, having people in the room, being able to do things sort of incrementally, but it just seems odd. It creates the strip zones that create such a problem for us. And if we're talking about creating infill density and things, it also makes no sense to create a strip. But
I think there's a lot of different ways to accomplish the connection that you asked for. This was one of them. If you had a different way to do it, we could bring a modified map back.
But again, so right, this has been before us, right? This has been before us. We've workshopped this. We've had public hearings. We just talked about this last month, and again, we're still coming up.
Well, not this specific. This split lot thing is new before us just this month.
I I
This,
thought
this,
the,
this, this lot being, these lots being split in half and connecting the area B1 to the area
okay,
A1.
thank you, Riley.
This was our just attempt to make a connection. It can look a different way if we'd like it to.
That's the one that you wanted, right?
Yeah, well,
What?
well, I was just going to make a comment that based on it looks like if we were to extend it through the full green, we'd be picking up one additional lot, but all the other lots, because we're proposed the strip, have already been communicated with regard to. It just looks like that one little piece on South Main Street, the little triangle, but otherwise it looked like there wouldn't be any additional communication. I guess I would request that the full lot be considered versus a strip.
Yeah, because it's the same owners either way. You know, it's the same number of people involved.
And it's just that narrow piece along the turnpike that really extends southward into potentially being where some future connection might be. But we could certainly, we can redraft the map any way you want, but maybe one option would be to follow that rural residential line straight down, and it does split zone one lot, but we could pick up all the partially zoned lots and not extend along the turnpike where there's really no access to that backland anyways for development. And if that doesn't make sense, I could go up and point it out.
But can I ask what was staff's thinking in doing the 700-foot strip as opposed to that?
I think it was one of the 6 options, and we had to pick one to achieve that connection so that we could continue with the public hearing. But we're certainly open to other options because we weren't given specifics for it to make that connection.
Okay, any other questions for staff before I open it up to public comment? All right, seeing none, I will seek a motion to open up public comment.
So moved.
All right, do you have a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Excellent. So at this point in time, I think people in the public, you've heard me say, come to the podium. You have 5 minutes. State your name and your address.
Pam Russo, 745 West Auburn Road. I know that you're trying to, add more housing. I just find this very, very odd to go from rural residential on one side of the street to T24, unless you're going to change the other side too, which I hope you don't. But this just seems really odd to pick this place right near 95, where there really isn't anything, just a little community there, and do T24B. Just seems like a very odd place.
Okay, any other members of the public like to come forward?
My name is Caitlin Mahoney, and I live on 225 Vickery Road. So I apologize. This is my first time seeing this map, so that's why I came today. And I guess my question was already answered, why split my land in half and make one a different zone. But I guess my other question is the end goal to bring water and sewer through part of that property so you can make an access road to the turnpike? Is that what I'm understanding? Or I guess I'm just confused as to why this particular sliver of land now has to be changed when it's cutting everyone's land in half. That's it. Thank you.
Good evening, Kathy Shaw, 1200 Soapers Mill Road, Auburn. I thought about a year ago we had a strip zone discussion and decided as a planning board and a community to not endorse those. And it would appear that this area in blue here is going right back down that rabbit hole. Kind of looks that way to me. Thank you.
Okay, any other members like to come forward? Okay, seeing none, I will seek a motion to close public comment.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Excellent, great. So any, I think one of the constituents had a question about the water and sewer. I'm sure you guys got that as well. So any questions for staff from the public and or additional questions?
I'll try to frame the question as best I can. Is the end goal to bring water and sewer, which would also allow building through road access to a possible turnpike exit? And I'll do that one. Did I capture that? Okay.
Yeah, the water and sewer are available in the lower part of Vickery, the area B1, area B that was brought last month. And then water and sewer are available on South Main Street. So the goal is to loop water down Vickery to Riverside Drive so we can get rid of some of the water quality issues. They have to bleed those two dead-end lines and dump a lot of water to make sure that the quality stays what it needs to be. So the end goal would be to extend a loop of water from South Main down Vickery to Riverside, and then to extend sewer from the top of Vickery down to Riverside, to allow for housing along the existing roadways. That's not to say there couldn't be a new roadway, but I think the goal related to an access road to either the turnpike or to connect Riverside eventually to Rodman Road, to give people an option other than driving through the peninsula in New Auburn for through traffic, would be more to not create development too soon before we know what land needs to be protected for that connection someday. That's why we haven't proposed going further to the south with the zone changes, but there's certainly room to extend it further than just the 700 feet without likely creating that problem.
Okay, any other questions for staff? Okay, any other thoughts?
Somebody mentioned the strip zoning.
Sir, public comments. No, it's closed, I'm sorry. Public comment is closed. Yep.
That was it. Is this considered strip zoning?
So it is a strip of a different zoning district that does split parcels, so I certainly get that concern. I think where we've used the term strip zoning, we've more often talked about ag zone that doesn't allow housing behind that. These are both residential zones. There's certainly room to adjust the map to better follow property lines, but we were trying to create the connection we were asked for, and honestly, we debated about 6 different options. And that's the one we prepped for the public hearing, and if there's a different version, we're happy to see it tabled with some direction on what to prepare, or if you don't like the connection at all, vote not to recommend it.
One question too, there's another comment from Pam about kind of why this side of the street, not the other, and why the other wasn't included.
Yeah, so a lot of the other side is included in the Area A. If you look at this map, I think Catherine's going to put them together. So that creates the connection between Area A on the north side of Vickery and Area B on this kind of southeast downhill end of Vickery. The topography, as well as the streams on the north side of Vickery that are still shown as ag, would be tough to access from Vickery, if not impossible. And we followed, essentially, we were staying within existing residentially zoned land, and we didn't propose taking land out of agricultural zone to T42B.
Okay, any other questions? If not, then I would seek a motion.
Before we have I don't have questions, I guess. I was waiting for a comment. It's kind of the idea. So I will say I do not like the concept of sending a recommendation not to do something unless you really believe that it shouldn't be done. Not because you believe you need more information. I think if you need more information, we should table things to get more information. There's a specific implication in essentially denying something versus saying we need more information. So I will express my personal opinion that if we look at this and we look at including, and if planning board members are interested in including the entirety of those lots and drawing a line going along the rural residential lot and kind of proceeding southwesterly at the back of the lots, splitting just one of the lots, it's important to note that that line that Eric's discussing is actually the property line of the golf course, which is unused and is open space and makes a lot of sense for putting new homes. You're not deforesting an area, right? It just makes sense. It's already open area. And then that abuts what is already a subdivision. So my personal opinion would be that if we are of the opinion that the entirety of those lots along Vickery on the southern side should be included, that should follow South Main Street and the Turnpike. I think that it does not present the future corridor concerns, unless there's like an incredibly dense infill somehow in there. And we keep talking about a turnpike exit. I'm not worried about a turnpike exit. I think if we were going to have one, it probably wouldn't be at the Riverside Drive anyway, given the topography. Okay, so you're not blocking any corridor from Washington Street to get to this magic turnpike exit at some point. So that's my 2 cents before any action is taken.
I agree with your 2 cents.
I do too.
Would it, if we tabled it, would we have to ask for something specific from staff, or could we ask to see those other options that you debated coming up with?
I'd rather not guess again as we prep for a public hearing and do public notice. So if you could give us direction, I mean, I can try to follow some of the lines that you just mentioned.
And I'll draw it as Eric's trying to trace, so we can see if we can get this.
Can you put the zoning on?
Yes, I can. Let me just see.
I could probably start with what I would like to see, and I don't know, maybe we can start there. I don't know if that would be a easy way to do it, or just say, if we're just focusing on B1 and B2, then I would agree that with Ian that we would, Evan rather, that we grab all that green.
Pick up all this green and come straight down, or pick up all of this?
All of it.
All of it.
Okay.
My suggestion,
but keep going. Go ahead, Evan.
To the south here?
Correct. To the bridge, and then along South Main Street. So you'd be essentially looking at sort of a triangle-ish total area.
I mean, probably what happens in the future will not include that land. Just, we don't know for sure yet. For a connector road, but it's most likely it would be on the other side of South Main Street.
But there's a housing subdivision right there. We're talking about, creating area for infill and things. It just seems natural to me.
We'll prep the maps.
This side, I will tell you, seems much more natural to me than the other side as well.
I think that's what you're suggesting.
Is staff able to present? Here's what's going to happen. This is going to come back to us, and it's going to come back to us as a new map. And I guess my question to everyone else on the planning board is, if we want to do that, do we want to have a public hearing on that change next month, or do we want a workshop? If we want a workshop, I want 2 different options from staff. I want Eric's original suggestion with that southeasterly line cutting and the full thing to look at. If we're doing a hearing, I know if I was going to table, I know I wouldn't want I would table it for this specific option. So I think, to me, that's the next step. Are we tabling for a workshop or a public hearing?
Good question.
I would do a workshop for, that includes public hearing, or no, I would do public hearing. I feel like people like to
Yeah, I agree with Tony.
get involved.
We would end up having to have a public hearing. It would just be an opportunity to discuss these things. You'd still have to have a public hearing after, but.
Yeah, so it'd be a workshop, and then whatever workshop would go back to staff, then we would have a public hearing and a motion.
And I would even be comfortable with seeing more than just two options, because I said they went over 6. If there's a couple, if we're going to workshop it, then we could see more than just 2 options.
Yeah. So I'm feeling like the board wants to workshop this.
Yeah, Eric, do you feel that by the next meeting, there'll be any further, well, one, I guess I would like to see whatever the plans were that you referenced with regard to the extension of the water and sewer down Broad, and how that might interface with, however, the interchange east-west corridor would overlay. And if there was something that was already presented in order to get funding or to get the thought rolling with the funding, if there was something more specific than just that red kind of general area, like any specifics, would be helpful, I think. Because I think where I'm going is that if we're workshopping this, we include that area, and then there's like there's a rural residential and a low density country that are on the other side of it, that are now sort of in between these two areas that we've changed. Let's pick it up.
There is not a more specific corridor drawing, but there's much more specific information on water and sewer. We could, I think there's value in not changing all of it until we know more specifically where that corridor is, but I also think that you, as a board, could do that through development review, but it's just not as transparent to people looking at the land to know what to expect in that process unless that's left for a future change.
Okay, so at this point in time, I feel like what we're trying to do is look at the map and get recommendations and suggestions, and then move forward with the workshop, correct? So is that what we're feeling?
Yeah.
So, another option would be to move forward with what's marked and then add on to it at another time.
Yep, absolutely. Or to, send this back so staff can create the map, do the proper notice for the shape that's shown here for next meeting to have a public hearing. It's up to you whether you want to have that workshop or if you want to sort of do it incrementally, approve what was presented tonight, and then recommend a future discussion about additional areas. We're fine either way, whatever the planning board prefers.
I would only be okay with an incremental if we weren't using strips. If this had come to us drawn to the back of the lot lines, I personally want that to go farther south. I'd be willing to entertain that. I don't want to put strip zone in because there's no guarantee that we get back to this.
Okay, so I feel like we're heading towards a workshop, okay? So, and I think we've asked Eric, one, we've given a suggestion. Two, Riley, you had some also suggestions, which I'm sure staff caught, right? So at this point in time, would the next step be to make a motion to workshop this?
I make a motion to table this, this hearing. I don't want to table to a date uncertain, so we're going to have to remember to take this off the table, guys. I'm going to table this public hearing to a date uncertain, and ask staff to present workshop materials on the the possibly 6 options that were considered at the staff level, an option that would bring the lot line, the zoning to the rear of the lot lines, and bisect one of the parcels, though, as was described by Eric, and an option that represents what's shaded right now, with staff feedback on the implications of each of those, along with any information that's relevant regarding the feasibility studies with water and sewer.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Do you have any discussion of the motion?
Would we say no later than a certain date?
Did I not give a date for the workshop?
We can bring that back at the September meeting if that's what you want to see.
You had said uncertain, so that's what I'm just asking.
Tabling the date, the hearing to a date uncertain, and that the workshop be next month, yeah.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
All right,
I know you mentioned the 6 options because we had about a half a dozen options. I'd say 4 of those were strips. I don't think there's any point in bringing those back to you, but we'll bring the other 2.
Make a drawing, put it in the packet, and
Yes, thank you, please.
I don't
Thank you.
want
I
to have to
appreciate
amend the
that.
motion.
All right, so we have a motion, we have a second, we had some discussion. I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? All right, motion carries. All right, so the next item on the agenda is, what area are we on?
C.
Is T 4.2B Area C. And if we could just get a quick briefing and then move forward.
Okay.
And I guess the briefing is going to be anything new and additional that we've not already heard from the last year.
So there is really nothing new in Area C from the last time, other than there are a couple of parcels on Poland Road that previously left out the back portion, but a vast majority of the parcel was in the T42B. It simply left a small sliver of land in the industrial zone, and we moved that boundary back, as I believe the board requested, to follow the property lines. I don't think there was another change since last month's meeting in this area. We did get feedback from the community conversation. Area C and D were considered the second part of that hearing. And really, in the first part, we had a lot of concerns expressed. The second part for areas C and D, we only had 3 or 4 new people come in, and they saw some merit in the flexibilities that T42B allowed for them.
Okay, excellent. So any questions for staff before I open it up to public comment? Okay, seeing none, I'll seek a motion to open up public comment.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Excellent, I'm opening up public comment.
Pam Russo, 745 West Auburn Road. So mine is really about this T24, which is this is. One question I have is, well, first of all, in the public notices for this, were most of the people in favor of these changes or not?
That's a question that we'll take down and we can address
The
later
next
with
question is, if most people who are living here are not in favor of this or these changes, who owns the land? It's certainly not the planning board. So it seems to me that people should be able to do, you know, it shouldn't be some broad T24Bs that the city council decided to do, because it doesn't belong to them. It's going to be a large rise in taxes for everybody. And I would really like to see the shock factor. We've done everyone, first of all, next time I really would prefer you had the names of the roads on here. That would be really helpful. The shock factor of all the T24B all together, because I didn't, without the road names, I didn't put those two together. That Vickery Road, that the T24B is above and the T24B now is below. And so I think it's very deceiving when you don't see the whole picture. We see just piecemeal. And so I think that we should be able to see the shock factor of everything, that this dark blue, which in the comp plan was, or one of them was like deep purple, but I really think that we need to see all of what you're talking about. So that's going to make us the second largest city in Maine.
All right, any other members of the public like to come forward? Okay, seeing none, I'll seek a motion to close public comment.
So moved.
Second.
Excellent. All those in favor? Perfect. Okay, so I just heard one question from the public, and it was around people in favor or not in favor. And I think you already addressed that, Eric, right? So one, we have public comment here where we can have people come in favor or not favor. So I think we've had no comment. And then you addressed, when you were doing your staff readout, the one or a couple conversations already. So I feel like you already addressed it, and this has been addressed. So in my mind, that's a closed item. Okay, any questions for staff? Any? Okay.
Is this a change in tax price for these residents?
So the zoning itself does not change the tax value or the tax bill.
Only what people decide to do with their land?
You decide to do with their land, and over time, taxable values change based on market changes and what people are willing to pay for land. So that also could happen if people are willing to pay more or less for land over time. We believe over time they'll be willing to pay more because you can do more with the zoning district.
Okay, any other questions? If not, I'd look for a motion.
I make a motion to recommend amending the official zoning map of the City of Auburn entitled City of Auburn Zoning Map dated May 16, 2016, revised through its current date and revisions as provided under Section 60-5 of the zoning ordinance to rezone certain land area from urban residence zoning district, suburban residence zoning district, industrial zoning district, general business zoning district, and neighborhood business zoning district to the traditional neighborhood form-based code T-4.2B zoning district as shown on the attached map. This item is pursuant to Chapter 60, Article 17, Division 2 of the Code of Ordinances. This area is generally located near Poland, Rodman, Manley, and Hotel Roads and is shown on the attached map, Area C.
All right, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? And if not, then I'll seek any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? All those opposed? None. It passes unanimously. Excellent. All right, so the next item on the agenda is the last, in terms of zoning, a zoning map amendment T 4.2B Area D. And again, just from a staff perspective, highlight anything that has changed for us from the last time that we reviewed this.
Yep, so last time we reviewed this, we had included the area north of Bob and Mill Brook, the YMCA property, and a few parcels above that. That's currently general business. We had it before included a strip, an 100-foot strip along North River Road as T42B to allow for some development opportunity there, as well as the top parcels. We were requested by the board to remove that whole area and just rezone and just present a map suggesting rezoning the urban residence and multifamily suburban area south of Bob and Mill Brook. So that's the map that we presented. And we also discussed this at the community conversation, and we really I don't recall getting feedback about this parcel specifically.
Okay, excellent. Any questions for staff? Okay, if not, then I will seek a motion to open up public comment.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor? All right, so again, come to the podium, 5 minutes, and state your name and your address. Okay, not seeing anyone from public coming forward, I will seek a motion to close public comment.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Excellent, perfect. All right, any questions for staff before we move forward? And again, would seek a motion if there's no question.
I will make a motion to recommend amending the official zoning map of the City of Auburn entitled City of Auburn Zoning Map dated May 16, 2016, revised through its current date and revisions as provided under Section 60-5 of the zoning ordinance to rezone certain land area from the urban residence zoning district and multifamily suburban zoning districts to the traditional neighborhood form-based code T-4.2B zoning district as shown on the attached map. This item is pursuant to Chapter 60, Article 17, Division 2 of the Code of Ordinances. This area is generally located near Northern Avenue, North River Road, and Bradman Streets, shown on attached map D.
Excellent. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, excellent. Any discussion of the motion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor? Excellent, motion carries. All right, so we are done with the zoning map amendments, and now we're actually moving on to the ag text amendments. So there were amendments added the last time that we had discussed the ag zone, and they were adopted, and City Council has asked that we then come back to us for public hearing. And then consideration of the various items. So I will hand it over to staff for the items 1 through 8.
So this numbering is based on, there were 10 amendments proposed by the planning board when you made a recommendation on the proposal B, Ag Resource Protection Zone. So when we refer to these as 1 through 8 in this first public hearing, we're talking about the first 8 amendments. Those are adding the language to the clearing standards for residential use or 2 acres, whichever is less. Number 2 is add the word agriculture in 60-145A, 1B2, and A, B, and C after that. So anywhere where we mentioned farm, farming, or farm, we've added the word agriculture, as I think the board asked for. Amendment 3 requires, adds the reference to 60-145A1B2 to make sure that the requirement that a bona fide farm plan be presented to staff who determine whether the proposal meets the ordinance. It adds that reference to ensure that as over time, that people are required to continue to meet the farm plan that they provided. Section 60-145A-B2 adds the specification that in order for a dwelling to continue existing, it must continually meet that farm plan. That's a little different than the last one in that it just added the requirement for the farm plan to the approval process to make it extra clear. Number 5 requires that the new dwelling needs to, the parcel with the new dwelling needs to be along a publicly accepted street. Eliminates any chance of private roads or old county roads or other things that would allow people to go further into the lot to fragment the land or to build houses in some of those interior lots. Where we required that a home could only be built in the front 30% of a parcel, this adds the language or 400 feet, whichever is less, recognizing that some lots are very deep and the 30% could be more than 400 feet, and it seemed the board wanted 400 feet as a maximum. Number 7 is adding firewood processing, Christmas tree cultivation as uses that could be, allow a house accessory to that. And then the draft proposal number 8 recognizes the piece of the ordinance that the council had already adopted that was not in the draft when you looked at it last time, that allows for a conservation cemetery. The reason that that's not shown as red or underlined text is because that is language that was not in the draft that you had, but has already been adopted by council, so we updated it to reflect the language that's already part of the ordinance that allows for that. Staff recommends that you recommend approval of these changes. We think they add clarity and certainty to some of the requirements and expand some of the descriptions.
Yep. So any questions for staff?
I guess I have a procedural question. Why do we have to include number 8 if it's something that's already?
It was part of your motion. We did not include underlined new text, but we didn't want to ignore that we had addressed it. So that's really in there to make sure that you as the board know that language is in your draft, but it's not new language. Because I think you were pointing out in that motion that it was something that was already adopted was missing, so we added it. It certainly doesn't need to be part of your motion. There's no action required for number 8.
Okay, any other questions before I open up to public comment? Okay, seeing none. At this point in time, I'll take a motion to open up public comment.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Excellent. Okay, come to the podium.
Joe Gray, Soapers Mill Road. Every parcel in Auburn is different, and setting minimum requirements for how far back or where you can put it on your lot is counterproductive. For example, my wife and I own a lot on Fickett Road that is narrow but long, and we want to build a house about 600 feet off the road. And the reason that that is the perfect location is because everything to the right is swamp and cannot be developed at all. And so that leaves us about 35 acres of farmland that we want to develop. We have already started developing it. We have greenhouses in place. We have pastures in place. We have everything we need. We have a plan. We know what we want. And it wasn't illegal when we made the plan to put that house where we want to put it. So this arbitrary rule that 400 feet is the end is just an arbitrary rule, and it doesn't make sense in every lot in Auburn.
Okay, anyone else, members of the public, like to come forward?
Stephen Beal, 575 Johnson Road. I'm a member of a large group of people who are in this agriculture and resource protection zone study group of several dozen people, and we had some extensive discussions with the staff, and the staff proposals in great part reflect the results of those conversations back and forth with 3 members of the staff and 3 members of a discussion group from our larger group. And we support proposals 1 through 8. I make no comment about the point that Mr. Gray just made about the 400-foot setback requirement. That didn't get discussed in detail in the larger group. The point about the conservation cemeteries actually didn't appear in Proposal B as it was passed by the Planning Board in June and finally adopted by the Council as the present zoning ordinance for the Ag Zone, second reading and public hearing on July 10. So therefore, we were going to bring that forward again. Mr. Cousins has just explained that that had already been adopted back in May. And why didn't it appear in Proposal B? Because the City of Auburn doesn't have enough typing staff to get matters reproduced in actual ordinances once they're passed for sometimes months after they are adopted. That's not a negative comment about anyone except that we need more help in the city staff. That leaves us with one topic that was brought forth at the June 6th Planning Board meeting. We presented a group of 9 proposed amendments at that time. Mr. Bergeron presented most of those in the form of proposed amendments, but the city attorney then said that because those hadn't been in print early enough to go out to public notice, that we had to come back and do this again at this meeting here. That's why we're here this evening with many of these same proposals. Mr. Sear also made some proposals in writing at that time, and I'll leave him to address those. Several of the ones that we presented were actually concurrent with Mr. Sear's proposals with slightly different wording, and those are also, to a degree, incorporated in numbers 1 through 8. However, one proposal that we did make which did not get included in Mr. Bergeron's motion at that time, although it was in writing before the board on June 6th, and which we think would be useful to have added, is that there be a minimum lot size stated in section 146, it's 146(1)(c), because there is no present minimum lot size stated for anywhere in the agriculture zone. The staff has explained that that's contained elsewhere in the city ordinances, or in state statute actually, in that you can't have a septic disposal system on any lot of less than 20,000 square feet. However, when a citizen comes in with a small lot, if he wants to devote it to some particular agricultural use, for example, perhaps mushroom growing, marijuana growing, a permitted use in our agriculture zone, or raising flowers for a floral shop or something like that. They might want to do that on a small lot, and they can't do it even though there's no minimum lot size, if the lot, no minimum lot size stated in the ordinance, if the lot is less than 20,000 square feet, to which the ultimate response is you can't do it because it doesn't meet the requirements of the state plumbing code. That's located entirely in a different place. Most people think of zoning ordinances as where you find the requirements and the dimensional conditions for the lots in that zone. So we thought that that ought to be incorporated. If that takes another notice, because it wasn't a part of a matter that was put out to public hearing, then so be it. I brought all of these same proposals back to the staff on June 23rd.
Sir, your time is up. Thank you.
Wanted them included. Thank you.
Okay, any other members of the public?
Good evening again. Kathy Shaw, 1200 Soapers Mill Road. As part of the larger Natural Resource and Agricultural Protection Group that did meet over the spring, as a group, we do support these changes and amendment additions. I would like to add, though, that in regard to siting dwellings, for us on this prospective new farm that we are working on, we're going to site the agricultural operations closer to the road for ease of transportation, customer service. And so it would make sense for our proposed dwelling, when we do decide to build, for it to be farther from the road so that the agricultural concentration is closer to the front and the house is in the back. So if that flexibility could be built in, and again, as my husband said, every lot is different. Every farm plan is different, just like so many of our dwellings in Auburn are different from each other. And that gives us all part of the greater character of what makes this city unique and special to live in. So again, our greater Natural Resource and Agricultural Protection Group is supportive of these changes in Proposal A, and I appreciate your time this evening. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else like to come forward? Okay, seeing none, I will seek a motion to close public comment.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor? All those in favor? All right, so any questions for staff? If not, I will look for a motion.
I have a question about the depth. In a previous item, there was a discussion about the front setback. It was specific to a home on Court Street that was set well far back beyond what would have been allowed under the previous zone and then under the current zoning. Staff said that in that case, a homeowner could petition the planning board to seek, I hesitate to call it a variance, because a variance is like a very specific thing, but you mentioned that there was another mechanism. Is that the type of mechanism that would be allowed in a case like this, where someone in the agricultural zone would be able to come forward and demonstrate that, you know, those areas that are best used for agriculture are actually closer to the front, and so in meeting the intent of the zone, it does make more sense to put their home behind? Is there a mechanism for that?
So there There's a mechanism in site plan review for dimensional waivers that is, I guess, much clearer and much stronger in the form-based code district, that it's explicit that plans not meeting a dimensional standard can go to the planning board. In form-based code, it's not as clear and strong in this district. It typically would have to be something that is required to go to the planning board already to do a dimensional waiver in the agricultural zone or most of other traditional districts.
Okay, yeah, that was confusing because earlier we were discussing a private single-family residence, and you brought that up as an option, so I wasn't.
Yeah, the form-based code is very explicit that we can do administrative reviews on projects that comply, and then any waiver from that gets kicked to planning board, but that's not the same in every other zoning district. So I think it'd be harder to make that connection in the ag zone.
So I guess to follow up on that, you know, if the lot was structured in such a way that the best location, you know, say there was wetland in the front of the lot and the rest it opened up and was great, but yet it's beyond that 400 feet, you know, how would we allow for that without not including that particular amendment?
We already have the 30% limitation in the adopted T42B. I mean, you could recommend that be amended to create some text that allows for the planning board or staff, you know, unless they're environmental or farm plan constraints, something like that. But it's, we'd have to amend the language to create that flexibility. And I guess I'd probably not comfortable suggesting exactly what the language looks like on the fly right here. But if that's something you wanted to see, we could bring it back with amended language for next month.
All right, so what does the board think?
Mr. Beal was talking about having no minimum lot size.
The state of Maine requires a minimum lot size to install a septic. I guess my question, does the city of Auburn require a septic, or there are national building code that allow for off-grid housing types that utilize composting and incinerator toilets, that sort of thing?
So there are some allowances for that, but our ordinance specifically allows at least 20,000 square feet for any lot in the city that is to have a dwelling on it that's not served by public sewer. It matches state plumbing code.
Okay, and that does not exist in any other ordinance language that allows for a lot that's smaller than that?
Some of the districts allow for lots that are smaller than that, but even in those districts, if they don't have public sewer, they have to have 20,000 square feet. There's a general provision that applies citywide that matches.
I guess that's what I'm saying. There's a general citywide provision that applies to all zones.
Yep, whether the minimum lot size is larger or smaller than 20,000 in the zone.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, I would look to see a motion.
I mean, I guess for a clean motion, if there was one of the 8 that you did not recommend approval, you could just recommend that one be left out.
Mm-hmm.
That would be an option.
You could initiate, and you could initiate that one coming back if you'd like. If you want to pass most of them, but you're not sure of one, that's one option.
I think that would be my preference, is that number 6, we allow them to workshop in language that would account for situations like described earlier.
So you're saying remove it now?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to make a motion, if that's okay with everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I make a motion to recommend approval of the text amendments 1 through 6 and 8 as numbered on the staff report. No.
Excludes.
No. What do we want? 1 through 5 and 7 through 8. as numbered on the staff report. To Chapter 60, Article 14, Article 4, Division 2, Agriculture and Resource Protection District. The text amendments were proposed at the June 9th, 2023 Planning Board meeting and follow the passage of ordinance number 10-06202023 on July 10th, 2023. The proposed text change is attached.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Do you have any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor? All right, motion carries. So at this point in time, we have moved past the 9 o'clock hour, and so we need a unanimous vote in order to move on to additional planning board items. I would like to seek a motion that we do move forward with items number 11 and 12, and not to last any greater than 9:30.
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Has to be unanimous. Okay, perfect. All right, so moving on to the public hearing, Ag Text Amendment, Proposal B, Planning Board, Proposed Change to number 9. Again, so Eric and Catherine, so we've got until 9:30. So just...
You're coming, I've sat here all night. Had everybody give 5 minutes for their comment. And you're stopping at 12 because you want to leave at 9:30. And I've been sitting here waiting for the public's comment. I couldn't comment all the rest of the time on this ongoing stuff. And then you're just going to bail.
Sir, we have another meeting on Thursday. You're more than welcome to come to that one. All right, so let's move forward with Eric and Catherine. Can you please?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
And I guess what I heard was that you may do more than one. You just want to be done at 9:30.
Yes, correct.
Yep.
Mhm.
The next proposal, B2, we broke this out because it was different than the first 8 clarification or sort of strengthening amendments. This amendment applies to prohibiting any new homes accessory to natural resource, agriculture, forestry, or recreational uses throughout the agricultural zone if it's also in the Taylor Pond watershed. Staff did not recommend this, as we did with 1 through 8, and the reasons for that are the Lake Auburn watershed. We've largely prohibited any shoreline development in the Lake Auburn watershed. We have fewer residential areas in the Lake Auburn watershed, and it's our water supply. I think that protection makes sense there. What we struggled with applying this to the Taylor Pond watershed is it does eliminate the possibility of any homes connected to agriculture if it applies the same way. We have some significant farms, apple orchards farms in the Taylor Pond watershed, and staff's opinion was that it's hard to justify not allowing a few houses on 10-acre lots if we allow for 100 by 100 lots along the shoreline of Taylor Pond. Those have a much greater impact on the pond than any single 10-acre lot would that's further from the pond but still within the watershed. The board can certainly go either way on this, but we just broke it out as a separate decision because it was we're recommending that we not apply this as broadly in the Taylor Pond watershed.
Okay, any questions for staff? All right, seeing none, I will seek a motion to open up public comment.
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Excellent. So I won't have to go through spiel. Feel free to come forward. 5 minutes, state your name.
And I'm going to apologize because I think I just described item B3 and not item B2.
Okay, well.
No, actually,
it's,
you are doing
right.
it in the
The
correct
packet
order
is-
according
the
to
pack-
the
right.
according
The
to the
packet is
agenda.
in the wrong order.
Pam Russo, 745. I have, so I guess I'm a little confused. It's easy to do in these meetings. So would the Taylor Pond ag zone, so that would be get 1 through 5 and then 7 and 8 also, because they're ag zone, just in general. Is that right? Instead of just the you can't build at all. And I guess that's what I'm confused about. So when you read that, I wasn't. So the difference is you just can't, is the Taylor Pond ag zone just the same as every other ag zone and just goes by the 1 through 5 and then the 7 and 8 now? Or is it, you said you can build some houses there, but if it's in the ag zone, didn't you just pass what the ag zone is? So I'm confused.
All right. Any other members of the public like to come forward? All right. Seeing none, I seek a motion to close public comment.
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All right. All those in favor? Excellent. Okay. Any questions for staff?
I think the clarification Ms. Russo is looking for is this proposal would ban any building of homes in the ag zone portion of the Taylor Pond watershed. So any other rules for a residence would not apply because those residences would just not be allowed, period. Is that? No, because you won't be able to put a home there.
Mm-mm.
They would follow those rules, yeah. Yeah, as well as the additional rules that were in the ordinance, yep.
And I think it's important to note, they also still have the very strict phosphorus control ordinance throughout the watershed for any new structures over 200 square feet.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? And if not, I would seek a motion.
I think I just wanted to, I included this for a couple of reasons. One, since this was the one that I added, and my thought process was that the quality of water in Taylor Pond was just as valuable as the Lake Auburn water, even though we don't drink it. Certainly, the recreation use of the pond is important. The property values depend on clean, healthy water versus something that has a milfoil. And certainly, obviously the phosphorus controls are there, but I know certainly this year we have had a lot of rain. The clarity is half of what it normally is. So there is a lot of sediment obviously that comes into the pond. And my thought process was, if we can minimize the impact that type of runoff has by minimizing development in the ag zone upstream, uphill from it, the better it is for the lake, and it is for the properties around the lake and the people that utilize the lake for recreation. So that was just my thoughts on why I requested it be included the first time.
Okay. Any other thoughts? If not, I'd seek a motion.
I make a motion to recommend the City Council should not approve the amendment to Chapter 60, Article 4, Division 2, Agricultural and Resource Protection District to prohibit new housing in the AGRP zone when also located in the Taylor Pond watershed. The text amendments were proposed at the June 9th, 2023 Planning Board meeting and follow the City Council's passage of ordinance number 10-06202023 on July 10th, 2023. The proposed text is attached.
Excellent. Do I have a second?
Second.
And do you have any discussion? Okay. Seeing none.
Y'all didn't add findings last time, but that was on you guys. So I would like to amend the motion to include the discussion under Number 4, staff recommendation on the staff report to constitute the findings in recommending no.
Okay, so I have an amendment to the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion on the amendment to the motion? Okay, seeing none, I will seek, all those in favor? To the amendment to the motion. Okay, passes. All right, so now we're back to the original motion with a favorable amendment. No, this is where I get turned around.
Riley recommended no. So made a motion that the city council should not approve the amendment.
Correct.
Yeah.
But you made an amendment to the motion.
To add findings,
Oh, okay.
not to change the
motion in general?
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're back to Riley's motion. We had a second. Any discussion? You had added the findings. All right, so I can call for a vote? Okay, so all those in favor? All those opposed? All right, motion carries. All right, so the last item on the agenda, and being very conscientious of time, is the same Ag text amendment, proposal B2.
So this one, pretty straightforward in its language. It added to the requirement that you can't build a home on a parcel that's enrolled in the state tax program, which the state tax program would prohibit anyways. It added that if you were enrolled, that you could not do it if you were enrolled within the last 5 years. Certainly, I think, was intended to slow any growth in housing. Staff, as we started to really dig into that, we didn't have a lot of discussion about it at the planning board meeting. We think it could have the effect of sort of disadvantaging an existing farm or forestry or open space landowner, more so than somebody that had never used their property in a way that would have qualified for one of those tax programs. We don't recommend it, but we're here to have the public hearing, and certainly it could. It's certainly not devastating to the intent of the ordinance if it passes, but we're just concerned that it could disadvantage somebody that has used the land exactly how we would like them to, more so than somebody who hasn't.
Okay, any questions for staff?
Yeah, can you explain that last piece, Eric?
Yeah, so in order to be in, say, the agricultural current use tax program, you would have to show the assessor that you're using your land for farming. And you're using the amount that's required and that you've actively produced on that land. For the forestry timber program, you'd have to show them that you have a forest management plan, that you've harvested in accordance with that plan. And in exchange for that, you get a tax break over whatever period. We were concerned that somebody who's doing that, who's meeting those standards, is kind of doing exactly what the ag zone calls for doing, for using that land for either agriculture or forestry or recreational uses. So requiring that somebody that was in those programs within the last 5 years using the land in a way that the ag zone promotes was limiting that person from the flexibility of having a home on the property, more so than if somebody bought it to, just to speculate on housing and had it for 5 years. So if you meet the standards to be in one of those programs, you're using that land in a way that the ag zone supports generally. So.
Okay, any other questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, I'd seek a motion to open up public comment.
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Excellent. All those in favor? All right, so public comment is open.
I'd just like a clarification from staff. All of they're using the term land, and for example, our parcel, 40 acres, some of it's in tree growth. So if we build a house not in the tree growth area, there's no problems, correct? Because that's not enrolled in the program. Okay.
Stephen Beal, 575 Johnson Road. I'll be brief. Of these three programs, I think by far the greatest number of parcels that are in Auburn, under one of these three, are in the tree growth program. the tree growth program already has very substantial monetary penalties for withdrawing the parcel from that program. In the interest of full disclosure, I have 93 acres in the tree growth program, and it's been there for 40 years. I have no intention of removing it. But if someone does have a parcel of approximately, I think it's 50-plus parcels that are in the tree growth program in the city, and wants to remove it, he or she is going to have to pay a substantial penalty, which is calculated in one of two different ways. Karen Scammon assures me that those penalties are very substantial, and I don't see the reason for imposing another term of year type penalty in addition to the monetary penalty that's already in place. Thank you.
Okay, any other members from the public? Okay, seeing none, I will seek a motion to close public comment.
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Okay, any other questions for staff? Items that you'd like to address from the public before we seek a motion? Okay, seeing none, then I will ask for a motion.
I make a motion to not recommend the amendment to section 60-145A1B7, prohibiting housing to be sited on land that has been enrolled in certain state of Maine current use programs within the last 5 years. The text amendments were proposed at the June 9th, 2023 Planning Board meeting. Following the passage of ordinance number 10-06202023 on July 10th, 2023. The proposed text is attached. I make this motion based on the findings that the language in this motion disparately affects landowners and disadvantages those landowners who are already choosing to use land in the way it was intended to be used in the zone.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Do you have any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Okay, motion carries. All right, so the next item is public comment. I don't need a motion to open up public comment, but if the folks in the public would like to come forward, because we're still within the 9:30 range, feel free to come forward. Okay. All right, at this point in time, miscellaneous comments, upcoming agenda items. We do have a meeting this coming Thursday, so the upcoming agenda items is on the agenda. This was in your packet for this coming Thursday meeting. And at this moment, I would seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, do you have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Excellent, perfect.